Welcome. Hi, everyone. Hope that you guys are doing well. This is episode 3 of Scoot Talk Sports. Can you believe it? We're at the third episode already? So, a big thank you to everyone who's listened, who's tagged along in chat, who has been here for the streams on Twitch when we record, who've retweeted, who've shared anything, or even just sent a kind note. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited where this is going, and it wouldn't be possible without fantastic guests and great people behind me. So thank you so much for being here, guys, with episode 3. So without any further ado, let's get set up for today. What do we have on the pod today, on the show? So today we have 3 guests, which I'm really excited about. We have Alexandre, who is a member of Between the Sports, or Between the Sticks from Vancouver. He covers the Vancouver Whitecaps, the Canadian men's and women's national teams, as well as the Canadian Premier League, and really anything football related. So we're going to have him on first to get checked in a little bit with the Canadian women's team at the Olympics. We'll then be bringing on Maxwell Mowbray from Waterloo United. He's a youth coach for Waterloo United, of course. And we're just going to explore a little bit about his club, how we train and coach youth in this country, and maybe there's ways we can do it better or ways that we're doing a good job now. I'm just really interested in learning about that. And then the last guest that we have today will be my friend Simon. IntoRowZ, you guys may be familiar with him. He's a Twitch streamer, and he's an absolute Arsenal nut. He's been a massive fan of that club for years and years. So I'm really excited to get him on and talk a little bit about Arsenal. So without any further ado, I think Alexandre is in here. So let's go ahead and bring him in and get started on this first segment here. Alexandre, can you hear me?
Hello, Jeremy. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Good. Yeah, we can hear you good. This is fantastic. Thank you so much for making the time to jump in today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to join the show and chat soccer. I always love chatting Canadian soccer, so it's a pleasure to be on and chat about all things Canadian soccer this morning.
Yeah, thank you very much. And so, you know, this is an opportunity to basically kind of pick your brain a little bit. For those who haven't been part of the show before, I always like to give them a little heads up. You know, I'm not coming at this as an expert. I like to bring in interesting folks, people who spend a lot of time covering things that I want to learn about. So it's really great to have you on. Before we jump into a little bit about the Canadian women's team, maybe we could talk a bit about all the different things that you've got going on. I see your Twitter profile is jam-packed with a bunch of different things. Tell us about Between the Sticks. What's that? Is that something you founded? It seems you're the editor-in-chief of Between the Sticks Vancouver.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's a project that started with a few pals, I guess, 2019 now, so 2 years ago. So it's been a while, just covering obviously the local soccer team in Vancouver, where I'm from, the Whitecaps. Started just as writing about that for fun, and then it kind of grew from there. It turned out, okay, let's cover a bit of Canada's national teams. I think in the first year, Canada men's team played a friendly in against French Guyana in Vancouver. It's like, okay, let's cover that, and then it just kind of grew from there. Covering, okay, let's cover some CPL, let's cover both Canadian men's and women's national teams. So it's kind of started as that, and through that I've got to meet all sorts of wonderful people, such as yourself in the Canadian soccer community, and all sorts of other people out there writing, photographers, and it's certainly been a fun project to work on. And through that I've also started obviously a podcast with other another writer in the Vancouver soccer scene. So it's been certainly a fun journey to undertake, but it just kind of started as that, a small idea. Okay, let's write about soccer, and it's kind of gone from there.
Yeah, if you guys are wondering where to keep up with this, by the way, I should also throw in a plug here. If you're wanting to follow him on Twitter, it's at BTS Van City for Between the Sticks. And if you're interested in catching him on the podcast that's come out of that as well, it's the Third Sub Pod. So that's Third Sub Pod on Twitter, if you guys want to find that out. I also see that it looks like you are also attending Ryerson. Is that something that you're in the middle of doing? Are you in the process of completing, or are you getting close to the end there?
Almost there. I mean, officially 2 years down from that. I mean, so two years left, 4-year program. I did transfer from SFU in Vancouver, so I took took a bit of a roundabout route there, but yeah, halfway done the program now. It's been a good program. It's the sport media program, so it's nice to be focused on sport and media all the time, kind of sticking in what I like to do and I like to cover. So yeah, 2 years down in Ryerson, and excited for two to come. It's been a fun journey there so far. It's a great university, especially for those who want to get into media. It's the school to go to.
Yeah, I've only heard fantastic things about Ryerson, and it just makes me laugh a little bit because here I am without any education or background whatsoever, and I'm bringing on a professional in a sense to have a little chat. So makes me laugh a little bit. And I think the last thing that's mentioned in your bio here is you're a member of the North American Soccer Reporters. Can you tell me a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, for sure. It's I guess a community of reporters all around North America covering, MLS, I guess NWSL, even CPL, since there's some in the Canadian side. And it's just, it's a group that of reporters around, so you can talk to people, have more support from other people. Just because sometimes you forget how big of a community it really is, stuck in your city's bubble. All the local, journalists and writers and bloggers and podcasters, but it's nice to kind of get a wider network. And as part of I guess NASR, or North American Soccer Reporters, it does come with some pretty cool privileges, such as voting for MLS's Player of the Week every week, and then a few other award votes, which is pretty surreal to be every week sitting there and voting for the Players of the Week based on what I watched in MLS. So it's nice to be a part of a group like that and have the support of colleagues around North America in that regard.
Yeah, what I've really noticed, and maybe you can tell me whether or not I'm completely off my rocker here, but it seems to me like, soccer, football fans in general, I've always kind of had tight-knit communities over in North America because you sort of had to be able to find people who are into the same sport. It must be the same with reporters and those who cover the game as well, that you're always trying to, you cover football, you're not just talking hockey. That's fantastic. Let's exchange numbers, right?
Well, that's it. Anything niche, when it comes down to anything niche, you're always going to find other people, right? That's the beauty of a community like that. And the soccer community is very tight knit, especially stereotypically compared to other sports. Soccer, it gets bashed a lot sometimes. Oh, it's this. Oh, it's that. So people tend to bond together over that stuff. Like, well, yeah, we like soccer. That's okay. We're all kind of close by that, and it's kind of cool. I mean, it'd be nice to have it continue to grow and become a mainstream community, but you can certainly tell that from the start, it's always been a kind of a tight niche, tight knit community, like you say.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of leads me into the next conversation I wanted to have before we get, right into the Canadian women's team. I also wanted to explore a little bit. I like to, I think in this country especially, there's some unique paths to becoming a fan of the sport, and there's also a little bit of stubbornness that's required. Living in a country that's you're swamped with the NFL, the NHL, the NBA, right? Which are all I'm a sports nut, so I'm excited for all of them. But you have to really kind of be a little bit stubborn to be a football or a soccer fan. What kind of drew you into the game? Were you someone who played from a young age, or what really drew you to the sport?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. It's a good conversation to have. I mean, for me personally, I started when I was 5. I mean, it's the rite of passage here, as we all joke. You all start very young, but I also played many other sports growing up: baseball, hockey. Those were the two other ones that I did growing up. And then, obviously in high school, I tried as much as I could. I even, believe it or not, did a year of ultimate frisbee. I did some track and field. I did wrestling for a few years. I've tried a lot of sports, but, soccer and hockey ended up being my main ones. And I actually ended up quitting soccer because, in Canada, the one unfortunate thing is the hockey season and soccer season don't overlap very well. Especially in Vancouver, it's rainy during the winter, it's cold. It's hard to want to stick with soccer in the winter. So I actually quit when I was younger. But then, when I was 13, 14, I got drawn back in. The World Cups were going on, and you still watch the sport, and then you're just kind of like, this is fun. Then why don't I keep doing this? And from there, it's just been hard to you just realize the more I've grown older, I've just appreciated the sport more and more. Club soccer, international soccer. I mean, I've been following since I was younger, but you just get drawn into all that, and it helps you meet more like-minded people who like the sport. You're like, oh, this is a fun time. It's always nice to gather for all sorts of events that just some other sports don't offer. So I don't know, soccer was always nice because I guess it's a global game, which always helps. It's easy to draw and just make connections. You know, you can talk with anyone about it, like this or that, and family members are more known about it. I mean, hockey, I still like hockey. I watch hockey a lot, but it can be a bit of a niche sport at times. It's really a North American centric sport. It doesn't have that same global impact. You're not drawn in every 4 years for World Cups, every continental, international club, and just something about that all-encompassing nature really just drew me back into watching and playing the sport as much as I could.
And I think I'm right there with you. It's one of the things that really drew me, and I was a late bloomer, let's say, in terms of really getting into soccer here in Canada. But I played when I was a kid, baseball, hockey, just the same way. But what I really enjoy about going to, whether it's a community match, whether it's a Valor match here in Winnipeg, you see a mosaic of the country when you attend a game. You get to see a lot of people bring shirts from wherever their hometowns are, wherever their family connections are, right? And so it's not just Valor shirts or Canadian shirts you see in the crowd. It's a lot of vibrancy and variety, and it's just like you can feel like you could walk up to anyone and be like, oh, what club is that? Like, and they'll just barrage you with information about their club, right? Like they've just been waiting to tell somebody about it. So that's what I love.
No, that's it. It's really just like you say, it's mosaic. I mean, I can think of instances where I've traveled and you don't speak the local language, and then the only reason that draws together is one of you has a ball, and you're like, sometimes it even just you kind of point, you're like, ball, like let's play, and they're like, yeah, exactly. Or even just walking around wearing nice kits. I mean, you wear kits. I think of one story just from like a month ago. I was wearing a kit I have from a team in Ecuador. And then some guy on the bus, he's like, "Kit, where's that from?" And I was like, "Ecuador." He's like, "Oh, Ecuador," and it was just a nice conversation starter. So it is pretty cool how it draws people together from all parts of the world. You'd be like, "Oh, that kid's from Ecuador. My uncle's from Ecuador," something like that. It's always cool to see the connection. So yeah, no, I really agree with that. It's it draws people together no matter where you're from.
Yeah, exactly. So I appreciate you letting me, talk a little bit about your history as well. It's something that I really enjoy because I think, even as fans, we have a kind of a unique journey ourselves, kind of get to the place we are. So here's the question. Obviously, you're a Vancouver Whitecaps fan. Was the Whitecaps your first love? Were they your first club? Or what was your first club that you kind of fell in love with?
Oh, boy. I mean, I would say personally, not first. I mean, growing up, the Whitecaps, they came in MLS in 2011. I went to games in 2011 and the years subsequent all the way through. I did go to they used to play in the USL. I occasionally went to the USL. So back when they were a smaller franchise. So for me, it would have been a mix of, say, for me, I was drawn in 2006 World Cup. Just guys like, Ronaldo, Rooney at the time, to a 6-year-old. I was drawn into Manchester United. I always liked watching them growing up. Then on my family side, my dad's from a small town in France. Well, not small, they're actually pretty big, but certainly a forgotten town in France, Rennes. So I also started to like Stade Rennes. I think I went to a first game when I was 9, 10, 11, but it's kind of a three-way tie between that. I think maybe Manchester United was the first team I watched. Whitecaps was certainly a team I grew close to because it was a local team. You can actually go watch and connect with the players if that makes sense. It's not from a TV screen. Then also, I mean, Rennes, I just always liked them a lot. Is kind of the French side. It's a small team. They're very likable. Because even as much as I'll admit is I like watching Manchester United, it can be hard to like them at times with how it is, the big club, etc. So it was kind of nice to have you have your local club, you kind of got the club you've already always supported, and you're never going to change that. And then you've got the team like Hen, which is a team I've gotten closer to as I've gotten older, just because you appreciate how cool it is a club like them, a bit smaller, what they've gone through. I mean, one example, last year they made it to the Champions League for the first time, and I mean, I've watched countless other clubs in the Champions. I've watched Manchester United in the Champions League. It doesn't feel as special, especially the group stages they play, and you're like, okay, they need to win. Whereas with Rennes, it was just they're in the group stages and you're so happy. It was like a big moment because everyone, for them, it was such a big deal in the town. So I'd say between those three, it depends on, I guess, on the day, who's playing, whatnot. But history wise, it started with Manchester United first, surprisingly, I guess, to most people, I'm sure.
Yeah, you know, maybe surprising to people over the pond, but you know what? As a Canadian, I don't think it's that unusual to have somebody jump right into a big club, because the exposure of, you know, like growing up here, you know, it was World Cups, it was some of the Euros, it was some of the only really the big tournaments that I was able to see on TV, right? So you were drawn into what you could see in a sense, right? There's a good comment in the chat here. The question is, what Ecuadorian club was it on that team?
That's a very good question. It's actually Independiente del Valle. So it's actually a club with surprisingly a bit of history. Pretty cool. I mean, I was drawn in because I went to Ecuador on it was a school trip a few years ago, and we went to this national store, Marathon. You know, it's their supplier for most of the clubs, for the national team, and they also sold other kits. And then I was there with a few friends. They're like, let's get some Ecuador kits. Like, we got, you know, it's one of our last days. You got some, you know, leftover money. Like, okay, let's spend our money on some kits. We all got Ecuador jerseys. So I do have a national team jersey hanging around in the closet somewhere. But I was looking, and it's just Independiente has these pink kits, just phenomenal, just so nice. And I'm like, I've always wanted a pink kit. Let's buy a pink kit. So I ended up buying a pink kit. So it is very eye-catching. I don't blame people when I wear it. I actually, of the kits I wear, it's probably the one that gets the most reaction because it's pink. It's got some really funny sponsors. Like right on the back, there's KFC, which is probably one of the weirdest sponsors I've seen on a jersey. And that people are like, KFC? Why is a KFC on the jersey? And it's always a good conversation starter. So yeah, it's Independiente del Valle. They won the Sudamericana. So I guess equivalent of kind of Europa League or CONCACAF League in South America. They made the final of the Libertadores in 2017. So they've actually got some decent history for a club. I think it's from Tena in Ecuador, which is a smaller town, but they've got great history nonetheless.
I love it. I love it. These are the story, like, as somebody who's obviously a little bit of a football manager nerd, you always try and find these like clubs and countries that are outside of, you know, the norm or the mainstream, I guess would be a better way of saying it. And that's one that I think is, you know, if there's any FM players watching, there's one that you need to snag as a good save idea.
Well, that's it. I'm all for that. I mean, one of my, I guess, side hobbies, so to speak, is I collect kits. I mean, but you know, I don't necessarily. Obviously, as a student, it's hard to see. If I see every kit I want and I'd buy it, I'd be broken in 5 minutes. So I try to collect kits from, you know, thrifting and other sources. And I try my best to find some really obscure kits as well. And for example, my, you know, if friends, family ever go traveling, just try to get as many obscure kits. I can just think of my you know, it's the stuff in my collection, some of the funny things you find. Like you got 3rd division French kits. I mean, I got, you know, a kit from Bangkok FC. I mean, who knows?
That's awesome.
I don't know anything about Bangkok FC, but I got a kit. So for me, I love kits. I think it's a good way to you know, just have fun with it, find cool things. And you know, every kit I guess has a story. So it's a pretty good fun thing to do that I do in my kind of my spare time, so to speak.
And there's a comment here from the chat, Offside Twice, who's a Forge supporter. He's that's why I'm broke. He's often sending me pictures of, hey, I'm on a thrift run. We'll see what I can find today. So it's definitely not the only one who's on that hunt.
So, I can sympathize with that.
Yeah, exactly. I know that ever since I've had that we had a little one about a year ago, it's been a little bit harder for me to justify the need to go out and get some more kits, unless of course they're for him, in which case if they're a baby size kit, suddenly that's okay every single time right now. So I'm trying to take advantage of that. Last question about you before we jump into the team. You've obviously got involved in covering. You want to become, you know, it sounds to me like you're on the path to becoming a lifelong journalist and follower of the sport. What got you involved or wanting to take that step from a fan to becoming somebody who's involved on a day-to-day basis and ideally making it part of your career?
I mean, it's a good question. I feel like certainly most people, I guess you talk to people in my program, obviously similar spots to me. I don't know. I feel like I had my moment almost accidentally. I've always, growing up, I'm like, okay, I want to, maybe I want to play or I want to do this. I never thought, okay, I mean, like eventually I'll be there. I didn't think of, okay, how am I going to take the steps to do that? And then, all of a sudden we decided to create, Between the Sticks. And then all of a sudden I was on the front lines covering kind of the Whitecaps. And I was like, oh, this is actually kind of fun. I'm enjoying it. I'm growing it within this. Let's just keep it going and go from there and try to just, learn from within that. So I feel like it was kind of, it was a moment. I didn't really set out, I guess in my head, I'm like, one day, okay, you want to be a journalist. But say when I started Between the Sticks, it's more like I'm bored. I watch the Whitecaps all the time and I have a lot of thoughts on how the team's playing, how the team's run. Let's just put it in a format and see if, people read it. And then you're like, okay, you know what? I'm actually having fun with this. Okay, let's apply for access to the team. If you get it, so be it. You get access to the team. You're like, okay, you can, cover the team. And it just kind of, I guess, goes from there. So I would say for me, I wasn't sitting there thinking, okay, I have this grandstand plan. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I was just kind of going with the flow. All of a sudden it's happened. Like, oh, okay. Like, okay, now let's go to Canada game. Oh, okay, we can cover a Canada game. I've always wanted to cover a Canada game, covering CPL, and next you're kind of, you so to speak, you got your feet in the weeds. You're in deep. You're trying to cover as much as you can. So certainly something that came up by, I'd say, I guess, accident, but it's certainly something I don't regret. It's something that I've had a lot of fun with, but I can't sit there and say I had a moment where I pinpointed, okay, I'm going to do this, and this is what I'm going to do to get there.
Yeah, it's fantastic seeing you and so many other. It seems to me like there's a generation coming up, just like we're seeing this youth generation with the men's team. I think there's also a growing appetite for more and more soccer stories, soccer coverage, especially soccer coverage that isn't necessarily, connected to the league. That people want to have stories that maybe people are feeling a little bit. I don't know if the word uncomfortable is right, but we need to dive into some of those stories that, like the labor issues we're seeing in the Canadian Premier League, for example. That's not something One Soccer is probably too excited to cover. And that's not me criticizing. It's just the natural, when you have that relationship, there's a natural hesitation to cover certain things, right? So, yeah. But we're not going to get into that today. That's a whole other conversation. Canadian women's national team. So they're at the Olympics. We've played one game and we drew with Japan 1-1. So for those who don't know, the Canadian women's team has traditionally had more success in terms of the world rankings. There's obviously a smaller number of elite countries in the women's side, but Canadian women's are a legitimate medal shot. And in terms of fans, we always consider them a legitimate medal shot. Is that something fair to say when we were coming into this tournament, do you think?
I mean, I think it's always fair to have. I mean, one part of the Olympics that helps teams like Canada is that the format with only 12 teams, there's not as many European teams. And right now there's a huge, I mean, Europe in terms of the women's game is really just killing it right now. They've got all sorts of domestic leagues coming up, all within the last 5 to 10 years. So many countries have invested. I think, for example, a country like Spain 5-10 years ago, they were nobodies in the women's game. They had zero investment. They barely had a team. And then they're like, okay, we have all this fantastic infrastructure. Let's create a league. Within 5 to 10 years, they're making quarterfinals of the World Cup. So I think what does help for the Olympics is that it's only 12 teams. There's only 2 or 3 European teams. So like there's no France, for example, and they're a superpower in the world's game. But even just from a pure talent standpoint, Canada on their day can compete with any team in the world. I think they've got the talent, they've got the defensive ability. For Canada, it really just comes down to, on their day, do they get enough goals to win? So I think there's no reason why you look at this Canadian team and think, okay, they cannot medal if the circumstances go right. I'm not sitting there thinking, okay, they're runaway favorites like you might with some teams. It's not saying, okay, it's going to be easy for them, but I'd say certainly if you're going to make bets amongst teams, I'd put them in your top 4, top 5, and that's what makes them medal threats, really. Plus, with these sorts of tournaments, you never know how the draw is going to go out. Just say, it's too early. You see the U.S., the favorites by a long shot, they lose their opening game. well, if they, continue their struggles, they get put on one side of the bracket gets, stacked, all of a sudden things do align in the favor. So from that perspective, anything is possible. But from Canada's perspective, there's no team in that tournament I look and I'm thinking, okay, I'd be particularly, I'm sitting there thinking this isn't possible. I think every game Canada has a shot to win, and it's just going to come down to execution. It's going to come down to their players being at their best. But you just look at some of the talent in that lineup, and you can't help but wonder, okay, they have what it takes. Just can they finally get over that hump? Because if anything, it's psychological. It's okay being that big team, winning that big game, showing up and being, okay, yes, we can win this game. And that's really the difference between a Canada and, say, some of the other teams that they need to get to, is just finding that mentality of knowing they have the talent and just getting out on the field and putting it to use and applying that.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, I think, that we've always kind of felt like there's this sort of I don't know what you're saying, a hump, but there's a little bit of a breakthrough that needs to happen to really embrace that feeling of we are a top female soccer nation. We are able to compete with anyone in the world when we're on our game, right? That being said, do you think that the Japan, so that we drew Japan 1-1 in a very early game, which I know many people were up early for, and there's another one tonight or tomorrow morning, depending on how you're planning on seeing it. Does the Japan draw, is that kind of epitomize the struggle to get as many goals they need to win the game? Or was there anything you saw in there that made you hopeful that they're in the right same frame of mind for this tournament?
I mean, if you talk about getting over the hump, Japan's a perfect example of that. They're not ranked as high. I think they're 9th in the current rankings. Obviously, former champions, World Cup champions, very good team, but they're an aging team. They're not the Japan of old, but it kind of shows that, psychologically on paper, you look at this Canadian team, you'd think, okay, they match up very well. They should win that game. But, it just shows that psychologically, some of these teams are hard to beat. They're well drilled, even if they don't have the same talent. So I think I look at that Japan team. It's the kind of hurdles you need to get over. And to be fair, I did see some progress. I mean, we have to remember at the end of 2019, Canada played a friendly against Japan ahead of 2020 Olympic qualifiers, a kind of a preparation. They lost 4-0, and they played a pretty good lineup, and they didn't look good. Japan outplayed them completely. So for Canada to come out, to go up 1-0, to grab a point, those are all very positive signs. I mean, yes, they should have had 3 points and be in the driver's seat in terms of setting themselves up. But a point against a good team in an opening game is never bad in a tournament. It's better than coming out with the loss and having to build from there. But I think Japan's exactly the kind of team that psychologically, if you want to win a tournament, you have to start finding a way to beat teams like that. Really, the tier 1 opposition. I mean, Canada, there was the stat that before this year when they beat England 2-0 in that friendly in April, they hadn't beat a tier 1, which I think is officially defined as top 15. So then beat a top 15 team in 3 years, in like over 10 to 15 games against tier 1 opposition too. It wasn't a small sample size. They'd always lose or draw. So it's really, for me, you look at that Canadian team, it's going to be taking that next step against tier 1 opposition. So against Japan, they showed some good signs. I think scoring early goal is always huge. It would have been nice to see them maybe build off that and grab a second. And I think defensively, they defended very well for a good chunk of the game. Japan wasn't getting a sniff, but they just have to find a way. If you get a lead, you need to close it down. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory, but you can't give up a goal like they gave up, which was, you'd almost be happy if you've given up a worldie of a goal, or just a goal that you're sitting there like you could do nothing about. But for Canada to get beaten by a long ball by a Japanese team that isn't particularly physical, they're not a team that relies on the long ball, but Canada just couldn't really handle one simple long ball, one shot where the goalkeeper's, your goalkeeper's kind of off center, and then all of a sudden you're down, and you kind of feel frustrated because it's like, okay, they defended well up to that point, but they gave a goal that you can't really give up if you want to win games. So I think, though, there's plenty of learning lessons. They can look at that game and be like, okay, that first 45 minutes, you get that early goal, you're controlling possession, you're controlling the game. and then build off of that. Get more chances, be more aggressive in the final third, get your shots off, and then more importantly, defensively, they're one of the best defensive teams in the world for a reason. You've got such talent like Kadisha Buchanan, Shalina Zadorsky, Vanessa Gilles. That's a trio of center backs you'd put up against anyone. Well, you just have to avoid those kinds of mistakes. It was uncharacteristic of them, and hopefully they can clean that up in future games. Because if they do, you like their chances.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's one of those things where if they'd had a loss, I think we would have been talking in a much different tone. Whereas it's like, okay, we got a draw. There's things we can work on. There's things that they can do. Coming out of that game, there was a little bit of injury concern around Stephanie Lebe. I'm probably gonna screw up her name. Is it Lebe?
I think it's Lebe. Yeah, I think it's Lebe, if I'm not mistaken.
But it sounds to me like she's going to be at least available for the game. Do you think that she gets the start in the next game against Chile, or is she going to be? Is there a concern with who's up next, or do we have a pretty consistent backup choice as well?
I mean, personally, I was already kind of on the fence of thinking I'd rotate her anyways had she gone the full 90. I think any sort of doubt, let her rest. I think it was a rib injury. So for those who've ever had rib injuries, even just a bruised rib is excruciating pain. So no reason to push beyond that if you don't need to. I think Kaylin Sheridan is a very, very good goalkeeper, and people were calling for her to be the number one even before this tournament for a reason. I think you look at that goal she conceded against Japan. Yes, it's a very uncharacteristic one that she probably wants back, but coming into a game cold when your starters come down with an injury, it's never easy for a goalkeeper to come into. So I think I'm confident if Sheridan or Lebe are in goal. So if you're Canada, you don't have to worry. I think right now, from what we saw, I think Lebe is the number one just based on experience and talent. Even if the talent between her and Sheridan isn't that different, I think just having that experience was huge. Just think of that whole sequence. You give up a very bad penalty. It was, if we're going to be honest, it was a terrible penalty to give away. You're up 1-0. Japan's not getting any momentum. To have your goalkeeper clean out the striker like that unnecessarily, it's terrible. But to step up, save the penalty calmly despite really having an injury, it's that sort of experience that really Canada, is lucky to have it in goal. So I think we're going to see a lot of. I think that kind of cemented Lebe as the long-term starter for the rest of this tournament. But if she's unable to play Sheridan, she has a chance to cement herself as well. That discussion can certainly change in one game, in one moment. And hopefully for Sheridan's sake, she can have that moment against Chile, because I know she's a good goalkeeper. I think once Lebe hangs up the gloves, it's her net really to lose until she gets someone like Riley Foster emerges or something like that. So I'm very confident in Sheridan. I think she can play well against a Chile team that looked a lot better than I expected them to against Great Britain. But I think, just got to rest Lebe for now. But it's going to be huge to see if Sheridan can take that step up in this game.
300 caps for Christine Sinclair. One of if not the greatest female player in the history of the game. And we're not just saying that because we're patting ourselves on the back. The numbers back it up. Do you think that she gets the respect and the attention that she deserves as an athlete?
Oh boy, so it's a loaded question. It's a tough one. I mean, for example, I think not long ago ESPN did their top 50 of all players in the world on the women's game, and I don't think Sinclair made the top 50 like right now. Which obviously historically you make that list, she's in there, but that gives an idea that even now she's still plugging away. She's scoring at a goal every 2 games rate for Portland, which is an elite rate for any striker, let alone one who's 38 and has been playing for at the top level as long as she has. She doesn't even get the respect now, and I guess historically, it really, I'd say for what she's done, she doesn't necessarily get the respect that she necessarily deserves. And I think that's part of, okay, you're Canadian. It's, a bit of a forgotten team at times. It's not, say, the US where it's all very well known, or even in Europe. So yeah, I think, someone like Christine Sinclair, even from within Canada, I don't think Canada realizes how lucky they are to have someone like her be not only just a top player. I mean, she's obviously a fantastic player, 187 international goals, most by any player, men or women internationally, 300 caps for her country. She's been playing since she was, I think, 16. She made her debut for Canada. I think she's been to 5 World Cups now, 4 Olympics. Like, she's done it all. But more importantly, she's a great person, great role model. People, on the Canadian team who've played with her speak so highly with how competitive, how, in good she is in the community. Canada doesn't realize how lucky they are to have a legend like that in front of our very eyes. And I think she'll be someone that when she's gone, a lot of people will really be like, oh, like, she's not here anymore. Maybe we didn't appreciate her enough for how she is. I think of, just for example, in Vancouver, where I am, in Burnaby, they recently renamed one of the fields the Christine Sinclair Field. And in my head, I'm like, what took so long? She's been a legend for so long. And it really shows that even then, that's her hometown. And I'm sure when she retires, there's going to be a whole swath of, oh, Christine's no longer here. Maybe we got to appreciate her. So I'll agree. She doesn't necessarily get the respect a legend of her stature certainly deserves, but she still does get a lot of, I think everyone within the soccer community has full respect for her. So I think it's more, kind of outside the community, not realizing that Canada has a legend like many not seen before her in the sporting community as a whole.
Yeah, and I think you've nailed it right on the head. It's almost an awareness thing, because it's once you've become aware of Christine and what she's done, not only for her own personal career, but for the country, it's very hard for anyone to not look at her and go, wow, like, what an athlete, what a person, what a person to look up to, right? I think you're right, though. I think in 10, 20 years, people will be looking back and looking at these records and going, wow, these are not going to be touched. Like, these aren't going to be touched for a long time, especially as you see the development of the women's game, more leagues in Europe, like you mentioned, hopefully development of a Canadian league at some point, or more NWSL, whatever it ends up being, right? There needs to be that kind of healthy ecosystem of professional women's sport. And I think as more and more women play, and there's more and more opportunities to play professionally, those 300 caps is a marker that is it feels like it might be something that takes a long time to happen, because you're not going to see a lot of those players who come in at 16 and play their entire career. There's going to be more players, more athletes, more women competing for those spots. Would you agree?
No, that's exactly it. I think the game's only growing, and it's gonna, things are gonna change in the long term, and we're gonna see more growth. And I think that's gonna be huge to have just more platforms for players to play and express themselves and be part of the pro game. And I think we're seeing that. Just, we could see, for example, for Canada, they need a women's league. I mean, the fact they've had a good team without a women's league really shows how much of an anomaly that is, and internationally. You look at all these countries. Mexico's got taken huge strides because they started a Liga MX, on the women's side. It just is fantastic. They draw some big crowds. For their soccer is ingrained in the culture. You look in South America, you hear all these stories. Chile started a domestic league. Argentina started a domestic league. They're starting a Libertadores, where all these things are drawing together. And I think what they've been doing is, like, they've been tying it into the men's and women's side. They're like, it's all one sport, it's one club, and the support there has been staggering. You look in Europe, same thing. Spain is the one example I used earlier. France got one of the best leagues, England, and it makes a difference. So the fact that Canada's become a good team on the women's stage without a domestic league is really, it's an anomaly. And they need to change that to offer more opportunities, more chances to be, the next Sinclair. Because there's a lot of people out there who want to be the next Sinclair, but then they grow up and they're like, okay, it's not necessarily financially viable for me. It's going to be a grind. Where do I play? I have to, if I want to have a chance, I have to travel to this when I'm 17, and I don't want to, obviously some players are going to make that jump. You got players like, okay, they'll travel, they'll go to college at 18, they'll do this, they'll go to Europe at 18, and it's a tough sacrifice to make. So it'd be nice to offer, platforms for someone who has the drive, the talent to be, the next Sinclair, the next whoever else in the world's game she wants to be, but doesn't want to have to go across the country at 18 or across the world at 18 to do that. And I think it just offers more opportunities for people to play, and it's a cycle. It kind of gives. The more teams there are, more fans go watch, the more people get inspired, and it can only be a good thing for this country. So they need to invest in it. They need to invest in it at some point, because it'll have such good long-term ramifications for the sport and the country as a whole.
Totally agree. I mean, one thing you kind of spoke to a little bit there was the connection to the club and keeping it the same, so that, you know, you have a, you know, in France you have a PSG men's team, you have a PSG, you know, women's team, right? You're not starting a new franchise. You're not trying to create fans and a whole new fan base where one doesn't exist. You're actually tapping into a community that already exists. I'd love to see, whether or not it's the Canadian Premier League or another league, I'd love to see a Valor, you know, female team and go against a Forge female team, right? And still have those same kind of battles. It's an easy step, instead of going, okay, we need to buy an NWSL team, we need to rebrand this team, we need to create a new team. It would be cool to be able to tap in on those existing kind of club allegiances. Coming up for Canada, we obviously play Chile next. What's the things to watch for in that game, in your opinion? What's got you worried about Chile? Is there anything that's worrying about Chile? And what does Canada need to do against whatever they're playing with this year?
I think Chile is for sure. I feel like calling it a trap game is a bit disingenuous to Chile, because they're so much better than that. But from Canada perspective, it's a trap game, 100%. Chile ranked, I think they're 30 something in the world, so they're a lot lower compared to the other teams in the group, say GB, which basically comprised of England, so they're ranked around 6th. Japan ranked 9th. You kind of see Chile like, okay, this is a 3 points, you can put it on the board. As Great Britain learned, that is not the case. If anything, I watched the first half of that game. Chile were the better team, but Great Britain, they got the goal they needed. They were professional about their performance. Canada needs to do the same, because for me with Chile, it starts with one person, really. Christine Endler in goal. She played for Paris Saint-Germain this year. Obviously, PSG had a huge year. Knocked out Lyon in the Champions League, made the semifinals, won the league for the first time in 15 years, breaking Lyon's ridiculous reign, really, where they won 15 years in a row, which is unheard of, but shows how good Lyon is. Well, Endler was a big part of that in goal for PSG, saving them. And I think she's leaving this year to find a new club who hasn't been announced yet. But in terms of goalkeepers, she is probably the number one goalkeeper in the world. So for Canada, a Canadian team, people are already asking you questions. Okay, where are the goals coming from? It's not going to be an easy way to bust a slump or to have that breakthrough when you're first facing the number one goalkeeper in the world. And from there, this Chilean side is very, very organized. I think like 80 or 90% of their squad all play in the Chilean league. So they're very familiar with each other. They play very cohesively. I saw them put together some very good passing moves. Attacking wise, Canada's defense should be able to take care of the Chilean threat. For them, their issues came more in the final third. They defended well. They got up the field. They just, in the final third, the touch would let them down. They weren't able to get any shots that would test. It was Karen Bardsley in goal for Great Britain. So for Canada, I find it hard to imagine they'll concede a goal, but it certainly has a 0-0 written all over. And that's not a good thing for Canada, because if you draw this game, you're sitting at 2 points from 2 games. You're facing a must-win against Great Britain. I guess if you draw, you'll finish with 3 points, which should be enough to, if I'm not mistaken, should be enough to get through as a third-place team. But if you go through as a third-place team, your draw just gets so hard for the rest of the way. So if you win this game against Chile, you got 4 points. You can go into that Great Britain game with a little less pressure, thinking, okay, yes, you need to win or draw to put yourself in good position. But you're not thinking like, we must win, or we're probably going to either go home or have a harder path through the knockout round. So I think this Chilean team is going to be a very good test for Canada. It's a game you don't envy for them, because it's one where you lose. And it's like, oh, Canada's, they're not as good as we thought. They're this, they're that. And that would be completely unfair to Chile, who are a fantastic team. But it's one where you need to win. You should win. It's a must win, but it won't be very easy to win. So it's really one of those famous trap games. It'd be, damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of, team for Canada. So I have full confidence they'll go out there and win. I think if I had to make a prediction, I'm thinking 1 or 2-0, but it's one that easily could end up 0-0. And then there's a lot more questions than answers. Yeah.
It sounds to me like, we're not underlining must win, but it certainly is. It would make your path a lot easier, from what you're saying, if to go into that Great Britain game and not have a situation where you're like, we need to get a point from this game or we're really in trouble.
Well, that's it. I was going to say with Great Britain, I mean, Canada saw it. They played England, really. For those unfamiliar with Great Britain, it's such a strange system. It's funny how like it still works like that for the Olympics. Like independently, England and Scotland and Northern Ireland and Wales are all independent national teams. But obviously, as they still fall under the Great Britain umbrella for the Olympics, if one of the teams qualify, they qualify as Great Britain for the Olympics. But England was a team that qualified, so they got their head coach. They picked 19 of the 22 players are English. There's one Welsh player and 2 Scottish players, so not even a Northern Irish player. So it's essentially England for those unfamiliar with Great Britain. And then very good team, ranked 6th in the world. Canada beat them this year, as I mentioned earlier. Huge result, but Canada in that game was a friendly. They scored first. They kind of got to dictate the game. And I think they have a chance against Great Britain if you dictate the game. But the problem is if you head in that game needing a win, you push up a little higher. England has so much, talent, speed, goal scoring ability on the counter. You open yourself up to potentially, giving away some goals. So that's why just adding to that, it's so important that they head into that England game set up to think, okay, we don't need to chase a win. Obviously, you're going to chase one, but you don't need to, because from that point on in the knockout stages, you never need to chase a win. You can game plan like that. So if you're Canada, you just need to make sure you get to the knockout stages. But you want to avoid those must-win games because they're always dangerous to have in the group stages where you're like, okay, we need a win. We open ourselves up, and all of a sudden it's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, and it's interesting actually. I didn't realize that that's how the qualifying worked for Great Britain in the Olympics. It's very interesting to me that no matter which one would qualify, they end up having to go in. They just get some more, I guess, oomph in picking the team, right? That's very unique. Do you think that must be a little bit weird for the players, even as you're playing for qualification? Say if you're Wales or Scotland, you get qualification, you still may not have your full team there. It's still going to be kind of a pick of. It's such an odd thing. Anyway.
Well, that's it. I mean, it's not as big of a thing for England. They're a huge power. If anything, I feel like, it's weird for them because they qualify. They're like, okay, they're probably like, why do we have to bring on some of these people that aren't even part of, the team? So first of all, I wonder what that dynamic is like in that dressing room. Welcoming, okay, these are your enemies, so to speak, rival countries. Like England, Scotland isn't exactly the friendliest rivalry, and you're welcoming Scottish players into the dressing room. But I guess that's just, it also must be strange to you spend all the time in the English flag, and then for a month you have to represent the Great Britain flag. I'm always curious to see what happens if Great Britain wins. What's that atmosphere going to be like if they were to win a bronze or a silver or a gold medal? But I guess it does, like you say, it has some advantages. The fact that the national team coach essentially can pick like all the mercenaries, so to speak, she wants from the other team. Like, okay, you need a good midfielder from Scotland. They've got some of the best. Okay, let's load up on that. Welsh players, Northern Ireland. But it's a very strange dynamic. I just mean, imagine if Canada and the US for some reason were a unified country, and one of them makes, and you're like, okay, let's half and half with the US for a national team. You kind of be like, okay, that's a bit of a strange feeling considering the rivalries between the two teams. But I guess we'll chalk that up as one of the unique aspects of Olympics. Olympics that for some reason they still classify Great Britain as its own country, and it leads to some very awkward, I guess, teams like this Great Britain side.
I mean, that's it's just something that I hadn't realized, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. But it's just interesting. It's just one of those unique kind of wrinkles to the sport, and especially a tournament like the Olympics. Before we even finish off with the Olympics, what are some of the players that you're watching at this tournament? Not just on Canada, but on any team. Like, what if a fan hasn't watched a lot of women's soccer, wants to get involved and watch a little bit of Olympics? What are the players that they should be looking for? Even the matchups that you're really intrigued in?
Oh boy, I mean, this is a good question. I will certainly see if I can. I might need to double check just some names here, but I'll start with some of those off the top of my head. I mean, to start, obviously we'll avoid Canada since unless you want, we could mention a few Canadian players. I mean,
of course.
obviously Christine Sinclair, legend in motion. Always nice to see, a legend write, some of the last chapters of their story. Ashley Lawrence, one of the best fullbacks in the world. Kadisha Buchanan, one of the best center backs in the world. Janine Becky on her day, she can be one of the best wingers in the world. Those are 3 players. Jessie Fleming, also one of the great next midfielders in the world. If you want 5 players to watch from Canada, I'd give you those 5. So keep an eye out on them. I mean, shifting otherwise, just in the group, Christine Endler is, in goal for Chile. Can she help Chile get a win? She's it's a storyline worth watching. Against Great Britain, she made some fantastic saves. So for Chile to have a player of her stature, I mean, even going to Japan, I think, if I remember correctly, it was Mana Iwabuchi from Arsenal who scored the goal. She's always been someone I've kept my eye on from when she's played Canada. She always seems to score. So obviously a very talented player there. Just going around, I mean, Great Britain's got Lucy Bronze, who, as a unique story as a fullback, I think she either won or was a runner-up for the Ballon d'Or just 2 years ago. Just to give you an idea of how good of a talent she is. Someone like Ellen White up front scored a brace. She scores for fun, playing for Manchester City, and she won the Golden Boot, or was second in the Golden Boot race at the World Cup. And that's just within Canada's group. I mean, you go to the other group, I think, in Netherlands, Zambia. I mean, what a story that was. Zambia making their first ever appearance at Olympic or World Cup. Obviously, they're against the 4th ranked Dutch. For them, they're just happy to be there. They lose 10-3. It's a tough result. They're playing Vivienne Miedema. I mean, first of all, if you want a name to watch out, Miedema, she's only 23. I think she already has 90 international goals or something obscene. Like, she has a rate of nearly a goal every game for her country. And she plays for Arsenal. Well, she scored 4 goals. No surprise there. She's a machine. But on the other side, on Zambia, Barbara Banda, she's just 21. So she's a 2000 born, just like myself, just for some perspective. She went out and scored a hat trick for Zambia against one of the best teams in the world, despite losing 10-3. She's obviously a very special player, and one I wasn't very aware of before this tournament, but I'll keep an eye out for now if maybe she gets a big move to a club. I mean, scoring a hat trick for your team in their first ever international game. What a story. I mean, just going down the list, you got the US. They're just their box office TV. Obviously, they lost against Sweden, but even then, just the talent, even you could see it in the game. They played awful, and you still just, Rose Lavelle on her day is just a fantastic player. Alex Morgan, you go down the list, Christian Press, Tobin Heath. They're a very, very deep squad. You go over to Sweden, no, they're no slouches either. I mean, they've got a lot of players playing for Real Madrid. I'm just going to confirm if I can get some of the names for Sweden. I don't want to mix up any names. There's Jeffrey Olasani is the one I think of. She was playing number 10. She plays for Real Madrid. And they have, I think it was, I want to say Jakobsen was the right back. She was also very good and causing all sorts of problems. And then the striker, the name also, it does slip my mind. So I apologize for that, but she scored a brace against the US and looked very good. And I mean, just going down the list, there's still so much talent otherwise. But Brazil, obviously, how could I forget Brazil? Debinha is fantastic player. She a winger. She's very tricky. She can get, she's very good at getting shots off. Obviously, a legend in Marta. Won Ballon d'Or multiple times. Fantastic player as well. There's a lot of talent on display in this tournament. So, all to say, I mean, it's the weird thing about the Olympics. Again, only 3 European teams, 2 European teams. You're missing your France's, your Spain's, your Germany's. But despite that, there's a lot of hidden talent in these, North American, South American, even African teams, as we're seeing. Very, Africa, for example. Lots of hotbed, it's a hotbed for up and coming women's teams. And we're going to see more stories like Zambia as more federations invest. I think Cameroon at the last World Cup, they were full value for their money, nearly pulled off some big upsets. Asia as well, always been very, active participants in the women's game. So there's a lot of talent. And basically I'd say if you're up, especially if you're in the East Coast, West Coast, whatever your reason, if you're up, turn on a game, even if it's not Canada. You won't regret it. The talent display is phenomenal. And there's always, in any given game, you're going to see a top player. And in some cases, some teams, 11 top players on the field at any given time.
Yeah. I know I put you on the spot there with can you just tell me everything about all the players at once? But really appreciate your knowledge is incredible. So I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Before we leave, I'd love for you to share with us what you're working on right now, where people can get a hold of you, if people are wanting to follow you. So we talked a bit about your Twitter. So where can people follow your personal Twitter, not between the sticks?
Yeah, I mean, it's at Alex Gangué-Ruzic for those. I think the spelling, my name's at the top left of my bar, if I'm not mistaken. At least that's the view I have here. So if the viewers have that, that's how you can find me, at Alex Gangué-Ruzic, all one word, no hyphen. And yeah, that's pretty much where all my stuff is. You can find, I retweet most of the stuff I do anyways from other platforms. Obviously, I got the Third Sub Pod, our podcast on the Whitecaps mainly, but also Canadian soccer, CPL, and whichever is on our mind that week or when we do the episode. I got some other writing projects, some that I unfortunately cannot talk about for now, but if you find me on Twitter when they do come out, you should share them there. But basically, I'm writing a lot on Canadian soccer, on Between the Sticks, mostly, doing stuff for the men's and women's teams. For example, after this, I'm going to go work on some preview stuff for Canada, Costa Rica, and the Gold Cup on Sunday. Obviously, a very big game coming up there. I got some, we're going to do some Whitecap stuff. They got a huge game tomorrow. And then obviously I'll be doing some women's stuff tomorrow as they play tonight. So it's really just, anything that comes to mind, you can find all that there. I do share all my work. So if you want to, if you haven't read any of my stuff, you want to check it out, that's where you can find me.
And if you guys want to find it later, I'll be retweeting out this information on my Twitter account. It'll also be as part of the pod. So definitely get out there, give this man a follow. He's putting in work. He's covering all sorts. I don't know when you're going to sleep over the next few days. There's lots of games to cover, but really, really big thank you for coming on the show today. I really do appreciate it. And would love to have you come back and talk Whitecaps, maybe some MLS in the future if you're comfortable.
Oh, thanks. It was a pleasure. And yeah, of course, anytime. This is great to that you've done this show. I mean, from what I've seen so far, it's been a great project, bringing on some great guests, having some great conversation. It was a pleasure to talk with football with you. So again, I'm open anytime. So yeah, thanks for this, and I guess good luck with the next episodes.
I appreciate it. And hey, if you ever find yourself in Winnipeg in the summer, don't come in the winter. Let me know, and we'll go to. I'll drag you to a Valor game. We'll have a drink. All right. Thank you so much for being here.
All right. Thanks.
Bye-bye. All right. That was Alexandre Gangué-Ruzic. He's a writer from Between the Sticks in Vancouver, as well as a up and coming soccer journalist. Really, he's already doing it, guys. This man is awesome. Please go give him a follow. Again, I will be linking those. Actually, you know what? Let's just quickly drop the link in chat here for you guys, so that you guys can follow. So the next segment, really excited about the next segment as well. And a big thank you to everybody who's listening, who's been part of it, and is part of the chat here at twitch.tv/scooter, SCOOTR. So for those who don't know, we record this show Monday and Friday at 12 p.m. and you can be part of it here on Twitch. So you're doing it. Join us. Don't bite, Well, next up, we have Maxwell Mowbray. He's a member of the Waterloo United soccer club. He's a youth coach here in Canada, and I'm going to be dragging him in for a little bit of picking the brain on how we develop youth in this country, learn a little bit about Waterloo United, and a bit about, maybe a bit about the Canadian Premier League, since he's a diehard Pacific fan. So without any further ado, let's bring him in. Welcome in, Max. How are you?
Good, you?
Not too bad, not too bad. If you don't mind just quickly going down to your sound and going up a little bit on the volume.
Yeah, for sure. I can a little better.
A little bit better. Let's see. What percentage are you at there on the, if you go down to the bottom on Melon app, right beside the mute, there's a little toggle up and down.
Right now I slid it up to 185.
Okay, hang on one second here.
Let's
try again.
Maybe I'll just try. Is that better?
It's a little bit better. Just one sec. And don't worry. This is the beautiful part about recording this live, is I could just go back and edit this out, so it's no problem. But I think we just need you a little bit louder.
Yeah, no worries. I'll try and talk a little louder. That's okay.
Yeah. Okay.
There we go. All right.
Let me see if I can. Just 1 sec. Okay. So thank you very much for joining us today, Max. I really do appreciate your time. Love the kit. And for those who are listening, you can see that he's wearing a beautiful Pacific kit. It's hard for you not to say beautiful things about those kits. They're fantastic. But thank you very much for jumping in with me today, Max. It's a really great opportunity to talk a little bit about grassroots football here, soccer here in Canada. You'll notice I go back and forth. I get slapped from my friends overseas if I say soccer too often. But this is a good opportunity to talk a little bit about development, some of the lower level clubs and what they're doing with youth these days. So the first thing I kind of wanted to talk about is the club itself. So Waterloo United, that's correct, right? You're a youth coach there. How long have you been coaching with them?
So I started coaching at Waterloo United in February. So only for about half a year now, I'd say. I started coaching there. Started to decide to work on my coaching licenses. Here, maybe I'll try without my headset. Can you hear me okay?
There, that's perfect, actually.
Okay. Then
that's perfect.
Forget the headphones. Yeah, so in December, I was getting bored with the pandemic. Ontario was in its 19th lockdown. So I decided to start working on my coaching badges. And I linked up with a guy on Twitter who worked for Waterloo United. I asked him if I could volunteer. And then shortly after that, I started working in their Skill Center program. So if anybody here doesn't know what Skill Center is, basically it's kind of like a program that's kind of governed by Canada Soccer for athletes between the ages of 8 and 12, which really kind of, properly develops them and gives them the skills they need to be successful when they become teenagers, and then they can go and either make the decision whether they want to play competitive or rec, and kind of helps them out. So if you kind of do want to follow that pathway to pro, and you played soccer when you were a kid, most likely these kids are going through a Skill Center program. So I started originally with the U9s, and then when my school year finished and I finished teaching for the school year, I started working with every level of the Skill Center program. So it's certainly been kind of a trial by fire, just kind of jumping right in and getting ready. But it's certainly been a really good experience, and it's been awesome working with the kids. So especially with me being a school teacher during the year, still being able to work with kids in the summer, and then also kind of, doing the thing that I love, which is, playing soccer, as well as teaching at the same time. So it's certainly been a fun experience for sure.
Yeah, it sounds like your two worlds are coming together and really providing a really rewarding opportunity for you. It was something that I actually didn't realize, and I wish I had known earlier. And it's something I'm going to highlight right here for anyone who's listening or watching. If you're curious about coaching or you're curious about getting involved, truly just ask some clubs that are nearby you. Chances are they need some help. They need some people on the field, and quite often many of these clubs will also hook you up with some training, some coaching certificates, whatever it is, give you guidance on how to move forward and become a little bit more helpful for that club. So that's really cool, Max, that you were able to do that and not only have the time in the summer to dedicate to some of that as well. Mm-hmm. So Waterloo United, I was taking a peek around, and they've been around for 50 years, which is actually pretty incredible. Can you tell me a bit about where the club kind of is rooted in, what kind of grounds they have, and what type of programs they offer? It seems like they have a load of different age groups and teams and programs.
Yeah, so this year has certainly been a really interesting year for the club. That being said, I've really only been at the club for a short period of time, so I wouldn't say that I'm like an expert ambassador or anything like that. But just from kind of the knowledge that I have, we kind of have the complete pathway to pro, well, as high as you can get before you go to pro. So we have everything from rec. After you go to rec, when you're, the age is between like kind of 3 and 7, you would move into a Skill Center program. After Skill Center, you then make the decision to go into either region or district, or OPDL. So if anybody here doesn't know what OPDL is, it's basically kind of like a, very high tier Ontario player development league. So a lot of the time, a lot of OPDL players will then transition into League One. And this year has been really interesting because we got a League One team. So we're not playing in the main League One Ontario division. We're playing in the League One Ontario University division, which is most of the players are kind of like playing out of universities. So it's a good opportunity for those players as well, because when they're not playing with their university teams, so, a lot of players from University of Waterloo and Laurier, but even players from, around the area, like University of Guelph, when they're not playing with their university teams, it still kind of gives them the opportunity to stay fit over the summer, and, play the game they love. So me personally, I'm involved in the Skill Center program. I started there just as a kind of like an assistant coach, and now I've kind of transitioned into kind of, one of the main assistant coaches, primarily work with 2 individuals. And one thing that's kind of been really interesting that I didn't really expect to do was I started like specifying in goalkeeping coaching. So while the other 2 kind of head coaches were leading their sessions, I would take groups of goalkeepers and work in on that. So working with goalkeepers has certainly been a really fun thing to do. And it's kind of been a certification route that I didn't really plan when I started. But now that I've done that, I took my first goalkeeper certificate course, so just like a standard online course, and then I'm hopefully going to work towards my goalkeeper coach diploma. And then after that, you can go to your C licenses, and we all know from Football Manager, once you get your C license, you can manage a lower league team, so it's all good. The pathway is there.
Yeah, exactly.
But in terms of the club, there's something for everyone, for all skill levels. We're part of. We're licensed by Canada Soccer. We're part of the Southwestern Ontario Soccer Association. So we play clubs from all over the region. So it's certainly been a pretty fun experience since I started, and it's definitely kind of just the tip of the iceberg for the moment, for me at least. So
yeah, it sounds like your real life Football Manager journey has just begun, Max.
Yeah, for sure. I think I was involved in Football Manager. I think back when I was podcasting for Northern Starting 11, I was added as one of the media journalists in the Canadian Mega Patch mod. But hopefully I'll be in the game one day as a coach and not a journalist, because it's always fun when I'm playing the game and I see a question from myself and it's like Maxwell Mowbray is asking Maxwell Mowbray a question. It's just it's odd. Every time I see it, I do a double take. I'm like, that's weird.
Yeah, for sure. It's actually kind of a funny little bit of Football Manager joystick here in chat. Wonder if Max has had a terrific group coming through and has the potential to be a real golden generation for the club. That's a little bit of a joke there for the Football Manager fans. There's a bit of crossover with those who watch my show and those who play the game. So, so that's awesome. So you got into coaching, really, it seems like the pandemic, being at home, is there's been actually some positive things that have come out of it. People were at home, you were stuck, and you had all this time to think about kind of what you wanted to do, right? And so now you've jumped into this journey, and you're really enjoying your time with Waterloo. What drew you to the sport originally, whether it was as a fan or a coach? What draws you to the game of soccer, as a Canadian who we're surrounded by any other sport?
Mm-hmm. Kind of building off what you said earlier in the show when you were talking to Alex, I was also kind of a late bloomer to following soccer. So I'm in my mid-20s now. And honestly, I really didn't start becoming a diehard soccer supporter until my first year of university. And I feel so weird every single time I tell this story, but one of the main reasons why I started watching soccer was because in my first year of university, I went to University of Guelph. I lived in a residence building. And for anybody who's lived in a residence building, you know how terrible the internet is. So when I was younger, I watched hockey, and we all know that, hockey games are at night, 7, 8 o'clock. And it was getting to the point where I just couldn't stream sports. I was like, the internet's so bad, I can't watch anything. So I was like, I have to watch a sport during the morning when the internet's still good. So I started, looking at the schedules. I was like, oh, I could start watching soccer. And so sure enough, I started watching the Premier League and things like that, because the games were at 9 a.m., 10 a.m. So if I didn't have class, I'd turn on the Premier League and watch that. And then after, watching a couple Premier League games, started following the league a little bit more, eventually started supporting Chelsea. And then after that, the snowball just rolled down the hill, and, Chelsea led into following other leagues, not just England, but, getting involved in, watching the Bundesliga, MLS when Toronto FC became an expansion. And then, of course, probably the one that I'm most known for on social media was, starting to follow the Canadian Premier League. And when Pacific FC came out, it was definitely a project that I really kind of wanted to follow and be a part of. And so, yeah, it's spiraled into, this massive part of my life that really wasn't there for the first half of it. And, of course, with that, there's all the fun things that come with it, like a massive football manager addiction and hundreds of hours in that game, and finding any kit you can, when you go to Winners. So it's certainly a huge part of my life. But around first year university was when I really started to kind of follow the game and get involved. So.
Yeah, it's interesting, especially I don't know if you feel the same way as me, but feeling as a little bit of a late bloomer, it feels like I feel like I'm always playing catch up. Yeah. So whenever I'm having a good conversation with a friend of mine who's been a fan of the sport forever, but you remember this happening with this player in the late 90s, and I blank. But what's great is world is so accessible. I can just go to the internet, I can do a whole bunch of reading, I can find that highlight, I can find that moment. And while I probably won't remember it with that same, wow, what a moment, it'll be like, okay, I can remember that. I can try to remember this player's name.
And it's especially after supporting, like for me, for example, starting to support Chelsea, right? You always, when you first started, you do kind of have that catch up, okay, who are the club legends? Who are the icons? What are the biggest moments in the history, right? And even now, I've supported Chelsea for, going on 10 years now. It's, I still feel like I'm playing catch up, compared to some of those fans who have been, fans since the day they were born, right? They're just kind of inherited. It's kind of like me with, I've always been a Leafs fan my entire life. My brother's first words were Wendell because he liked Wendell Clark. So I've always had that attachment to the Leafs, and I know all the history, and I know that just because it was a default, right? But with being a late bloomer and following the, sport of soccer, you're still playing catch up, even a decade after you started following the sport, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that, through the few different interviews that I've had on the show and just meeting, people throughout the last few years, it's such a different kind of feel as a North American, especially if you're not a transplanted North American, you're someone who grew up here, you didn't kind of bring that soccer history with your family with you. My family wasn't big soccer fans, right? So here it's very much, we kind of have to find your own way to it. Yeah. Whatever that way ends up being, right? You were needing to watch some sport in the morning, and this was the one you ended up watching, or it's just the matter of fact that we grow up with so many options. We're lucky, I think, in a sense that a lot of us are lucky enough to have so many sport choices growing up, to be able to dabble in anything. But a lot of the people I meet overseas, right? It's you were born into that fandom. You were almost told as a child what club may be yours, and maybe you're the child who rebels, right, and chooses the rival just to piss off the rest of your family. But it's such an interesting dynamic over here, I think, in terms of how people find their way to a club. And with that being said, a little bit of a ramble there, but I have a point. There's a point here, Max, I swear. Pacific, Waterloo, if I'm correct, is in Ontario. Pacific is very far to the west. In fact, almost as far as you can go west. What drew you into Pacific?
Yeah, so when I originally started my Twitter, it was pretty much just a straight up Pacific SC account. I was PFC Ontario for a bit. And then I switched my names. And so I obviously still tweet a lot about Pacific. But I wanted to kind of have my Twitter more set towards, being able, I found it weird when it was my name was PFC Ontario, but then I would tweet about Chelsea, or I'd tweet about Borussia Dortmund. So I switched my name. But originally when I started following Pacific, I was looking at the Canadian Premier League. I thought it was a really cool project. By that point, I had been following soccer for quite a long time, at least when you look at how long it was a decent amount of time, not as long as other people, but for me, it was a decent amount of time. So I started taking a look at the league and kind of the teams that were available. And I don't know if other people relate to this. Maybe it was just a me thing, me being weird. But I had already supported Toronto FC in the MLS for a decent amount of time. And I thought it would kind of be weird supporting two Ontario teams playing in the same country. Sure, they were in separate leagues, but like they could meet up in the Canadian Championship, and then that's a weird dynamic. Like, what do you do, right? So my dad grew up in BC. When he was a kid, his father was he owned a couple Zellers stores. Remember Zellers?
Yeah.
So he owned a couple Zeller stores and lived in a couple different places in BC, Port Coquitlam, Chilliwack, Burnaby, places like that. And then so I was like, oh, Pacific might be cool. And so I started kind of looking at the ownership group and kind of the vibe that they were kind of giving off. I thought it was a really cool project. And at the same time, I had supported Chelsea. I had supported Dortmund for so long, and there's time changes and things like that. And I was like, well, it's no different with Pacific. There's still a time change, so it might be. I don't know the exact difference between like I know Ontario to BC is 3 hours. I've gotten used to that. I had that one memorized because I've had some late nights watching Pacific, whereas I can't remember the BC one. That's okay. But so, yeah, my dad grew up in BC and I thought, Pacific was just kind of a cool club. I liked kind of the aura that they gave off. And it pretty much just kind of went on from there with the inaugural season, had a podcast for a while. I wrote for a bit. And then after I kind of finished teachers college, kind of transitioned to just kind of maintaining the Twitter account and following the league and kind of becoming, a member of this, massively growing Canadian soccer community. Even though both Pacific and the league have kind of had ups and downs, I think it's been really fun to be a part of it and kind of watch the game in this country grow.
Yeah, I think it's one of those clubs, like even as a Valor fan, obviously I grew up in Winnipeg. It was an easy choice for me to figure out which team in the league I was going to cheer for. But Pacific has sort of been, you always have a kind of another team in your division or in your league where you can't really feel the rivalry because you kind of like them.
That's how
I've always Pacific, whether it's the kits, whether it's their manager, whether it's their ownership, or whether it's the ground that they play in, which is absolutely on my away day list one day when I can afford a flight out there for an away day game. But it just seems like a really complete package that really is doing good things in that community and is an extension of things that were already happening in that the Vancouver Island community, really, which it just seems to, I don't know what it is, but that good vibe you were talking about really does seem to come off them. And even when I, if and when, Valor lose to Pacific this year, I will certainly be sad, but I won't be angry, if that makes any sense. So we've talked a little bit about, how you got involved in coaching, how you became a fan, how you became a Pacific fan. I was always curious about that. I had to ask that on the show.
Yeah. No worries.
So what I think I want to get a little bit more into like what you actually do with some of these kids, what some of the training is like. So can you give me an idea of the age group that you're working with and some of the like drills or things that we teach players at this age?
Yeah, so I work with ages U8 to U12, and I'm part of the boys program. We have the exact same program. So all the programs that I mentioned, Rec, Skill Center, OPDL, League One, we have both for men's and women's, and there's dedicated coaches for both programs. So that's one thing that I've really liked about the clubs is that they prioritize both the men's and the women's programs, which are awesome. But I was assigned to the boys program, so U8 to U12. Right now, at least, obviously with COVID, things were kind of weird there for a bit. In the winter, we could only do one practice a week and we had to break it up into different groups. We could only have like 10 players in a group. So it'd be really weird when there's like 3 coaches and 10 players. But now that things are, normal. We
on
have
wood.
2 practices a week, games on the weekend, both home and away. So in terms of the practice, where we kind of get into the nitty gritty, you know, we have groups of about 30 to 40 athletes, depending on the age group. And of course, you know, with summer, you know, attendance can be spotty, you know, especially with things opening. So we have kind of like a head coach of the program who has curriculum, well-qualified individual. I've really enjoyed working with him. I've learned quite a lot from him. And so he has a curriculum. We get sent out the curriculum, and it kind of depends on the group. So U8, U9 kind of stick to the same curriculum, and then 10, 11, 12 have their own curriculum as well. So with U8, U9, it's mostly just kind of getting them comfortable on the ball, kind of really emphasizing those kind of like basic skills, because some of these kids are kind of coming out of the rec programs, which is very basic. It's just kind of like physical literacy, getting comfortable with your body, being able to run, turn around, stop, things like that. Whereas when they come into the skill center for the first time, U8, U9, it's kind of taking those skills, building on them, advancing them, and then also kind of throwing in some, you know, shooting and passing and getting comfortable with that. Whereas with 10, 11, 12s, that's when you kind of really start emphasizing things like the rules of the game, and getting into formation, and kind of, you know, learning how the on-field aspect of the game kind of works. Because when you're playing rec or you're playing at a younger age group, you know, you're doing 5v5, you know, your formation is a diamond, right? It's just, as long as they're not in a line, as long as they're not 1, 2, 3, 4 in a line, you're happy. Whereas when they're getting older, you know, and they start playing 7v7, 9v9, and then eventually 11v11 once they get into the OPDL programs, you really got to kind of get them to learn how to kind of keep shape and you know, understand what a formation is and kind of understand how the rules of the game work. But that being said, with youth soccer in this country, you know, there are some kind of rules that are different compared to Europe. So that being said, it is kind of a little different from kind of like if you saw a kid who was playing FIFA, the rules that they would see on FIFA might be a little bit different from the rules that they see when they come and play, you know, for a Canadian youth soccer club. You know, introducing things like a retreat line. So when there's a goal kick, you know, you got to be behind the retreat line, so that it really emphasizes the kids to play out of the back. So that's one thing that kind of Canada Soccer is really focusing on. So not just Ontario, but kind of countrywide, is this kind of play out of the back movement, you know, start with the goalie to the defense, to the midfield, to the striker. They're really trying to get rid of that, you know, 80s, 90s model where it was just hoof the ball up to the striker, pray that he gets it, and build from the play. Whereas here it's kind of a lot of, you know, really focus on the build-up play, you know, lots of quick passes back and forth, you know, utilize the wings, utilize your shape. You know, one thing that I always have to say is, you know, when we're attacking, let's spread out, let's use the wings, let's use the whole field. And then when we're attacking, let's get a little bit closer, stay tight, and keep shape, right? But obviously, when you're learning these formations for the first time, it can certainly be, you know, a challenge for some of these kids. But all the kids that I coach are honestly, it's just, they're just so happy to be back, you know? We could be doing sprints for an hour and they'll be happy because they're just back with their friends playing soccer, right? Yeah. Obviously, we don't do sprints for an hour. But yeah, the kids are just happy to play. But it's certainly kind of an interesting dynamic that we have here in Canadian youth soccer. You know, whether that's, you know, the dynamic between the coaches and kind of following these new things, or the players who are, you know, trying to, you know, play a sport that's, you know, not as popular in this country compared to things like hockey or things like that. So.
Yeah. I mentioned it previously, and I'm sure you've heard me say it before, but in a sense, you do have to be somewhat stubborn to want to be focused on the sport here, because it overlaps with so many other popular sports that are you know, high enrollment in Canada. But man, does that sound fun. Like, I'm not gonna lie, like, it does sound fun to go from that, you know, kind of, hey, we're gonna kick the ball around, we're gonna run around, we're gonna have some fun, you know, 7, 8, 9, and then as you start moving in 10, 11, 12s, to really start to try and build that awareness of, you know, this is what a tactic is. This is kind of what your positional responsibility might be like. This is how to read a play. Because that was something that came up in conversation with other people, I think last year on Twitter, where around what some of the struggles the Canadian Premier League had that first year. And one of the few things that came out from some of the coaches across the league was that Canadians in general they were really good technically, very decent technically, but when it came to reading the play and being able to understand like what formation the other team is coming with when they're dropping a player or moving a player forward, like that ability to read the play, they felt like Canada as a nation, that was something we could do better. So it sounds like Canada Soccer sort of on it already in terms of trying to force the play from the back. Don't just hoof it forward. We're not playing. We're not just going to play ultra direct the whole time.
Yeah. Just hoof it up to Giroud, he'll get it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're the target men. You are all center backs. Let's go.
Yeah.
But no, that's really interesting. What happens? Do you know what happens after that age group? Have you moved into older players beyond that, or is?
So I've just worked with the skill center, so U8 to U12. And then after you so-called graduate from the skill center program, you kind of have two choices. So you either go into the regional and district leagues. So that's kind of like it's a less competitive model. So OPDL is the competitive model. Region and district is the less competitive model, but it still kind of keeps up the same standards of the skill center program. So skill center gets you ready for both programs. And then you make the decision of which program you want to go into. So after that, you either choose whether you want to play in sort of the region and the district, so Southern Ontario, whereas OPDL, you're playing against some of the top youth teams in this province. So with that, I've only worked with the one. Part of our club. Obviously, there's so many parts of the club that you can get involved with. But definitely after that, you kind of have that decision to make whether like if you want to go pro and you're trying to find that pathway to pro or even to something like League One Ontario, you're likely going to go to OPDL. Whereas if you're just kind of playing for fun or you're playing on the side and you just want to stay active, then you'd likely just stick with the region and district programs. So
it's interesting that a decision like that for a kid at 12,
I know, right?
It's interesting because I'm sitting there and I'm thinking like, my own personal experience through life, we go through school, we go through different things. I don't think I had to make such an incredibly important decision at 12 years old around, like, I wasn't an elite athlete by any measure. I certainly played a lot of hockey and baseball at the time, not soccer, sadly. But 12 years old to decide, hey, are you doing this for fun? Or are you trying to maybe get to college or university with this? Do you want to make this pro opportunity, right? Because those are some things that I can't, do 12-year-olds that are they thinking about stuff like that already?
No, not at all.
No. So
it's the exact same thing. Like, so I didn't coach. I taught a 4-5 class in the afternoon, and I taught a grade 6 class in the morning. So very similar age groups to the age groups that I coached. And it'd be like the exact same thing if I went into my classroom or I logged on to my Google Meet because we were in lockdown.
Yeah.
And I asked these kids, hey, what do you want to do for a living? Some of them might have an answer. And then others they'll have no idea, right? So it's a huge decision to make. And there's going to be those kids that are able to make that choice, pretty easily. Like I had some kids in my right away they're like, I want to do this when I grow up, and they're really determined on it. But the majority of the population, they don't know what they want to do. And me at 12 years old, I wouldn't have predicted that I was going to be a teacher. I don't think I made that decision until like grade 11, right? So even just deciding that, that was a massive decision, a huge part of my life that would determine the rest of my life and what I'm going to do. So it's the exact same thing with your playing path, making that decision. Do I want to go pro? Do I want to go semi-pro? Do I want to play in college and university? That's a huge decision to make when you're young.
But the reality, I think, is too, it's as much as I'm thinking about, 12 years old to make that kind of decision, at the same time, that's around the time you need to start thinking about it because of the amount of training and effort it's going to take. You're going to be looked at, you're going to be scouted, at those ages, especially if you start moving into the more serious side of things. That's really interesting. Again, something I didn't know before we chatted. So that's fantastic.
Yeah.
What has been some of the most rewarding parts of coaching and getting involved with the kids?
Yeah, so it's definitely very similar to teaching. Just kind of getting to know the people that you work with, so your coworkers, but then also more importantly, getting to know the athletes or the students that you work with and kind of seeing them progress, right? There's nothing more rewarding than seeing someone learn. And I've been fortunate enough to kind of see that in multiple contexts, whether that be in a classroom as a teacher or, on the field as a coach. So just kind of seeing kids progress and set goals and achieve those goals, or have setbacks and then come back even stronger. It's certainly a very rewarding experience from top to bottom. That being said, it does have its challenges, but just like the athletes, you're going to have setbacks and then you're going to come back stronger from that. So it's definitely been really, really rewarding, just kind of getting to know the kids, but also just kind of soaking in every minute of it. I was by no means I wasn't on the pathway to pro, and I knew that at a very young age. So mind you, like injuries were kind of in the way, but that being said, so just kind of learning from individuals around me who maybe did make that decision, and they want to pass on their knowledge. I've been really fortunate enough to work with a lot of really qualified individuals who are very knowledgeable, and have kind of passed on their skills to me, and then also kind of taking those skills and kind of developing my own coaching mindset. Everyone kind of comes in and they all have their own philosophy. And obviously you can't just kind of take someone's philosophy and then, okay, that's mine. Everyone, you kind of take a little bit from here and a little bit from here, and you kind of put it all in together, and then you build your own coaching philosophy or your own teaching philosophy. So just kind of soaking in every minute of it and learning from the individuals that I get to work with kind of, throughout the week. It's certainly been really rewarding. And then probably the highlight of my summer so far was actually coaching a game against a former Canadian Premier League player. I was in Guelph, and my U8 boys were playing the Guelph Griffins, and former York 9 defender Justin Springer is really involved with Guelph soccer, their League One program, but also their youth soccer. So I coached a game against Justin Springer's U8 boys. So that was a really cool experience, going up against a former CPLer. And, just kind of goes to show kind of the small world, that we live in. So.
And it's interesting that you mentioned it's a small world, right? And I think it's something that people don't realize, the amount of volunteer hours that go into amateur sports in this country. That's not like a lot of situations in more of these, I don't know, footballing nations where your academies are constantly looking out. Academies are well equipped, well budgeted. A lot of the effort here in Canada is volunteers, people who have a passion for the sport, a passion for the job. And so, being part of that, it must feel like you're part of a very tight woven community, that it's all kind of aiming at the same goals. That being said, what's your plan in the future? Do you have an idea of what you want to do with this? Is this always going to be kind of obviously you teach as a full-time job. Is this something that you want to keep going with? You want to continue to get your licenses and see where it takes you?
Yeah, I definitely love for now to kind of keep it up as a summer gig. The schedule kind of really aligns well, kind of obviously once the kids are out of school, the schedule kind of amps up. And of course, when the kids are done school, I'm done school. So definitely a really nice summer gig to kind of keep doing. I think I'll still kind of do it. I might work with less teams during the school year, but still kind of coach, 1 or 2 teams during the school year and work with that. And other than that, yeah, just kind of keep learning, as teachers, as coaches, you never stop learning. That's part of the job, right? So definitely still going to kind of work towards some of those coaching badges. Definitely want to work towards my goalkeeper diploma, and my C license. And for just as kind of like a little plug, like for anybody who's kind of interested, it's really easy to kind of find the resources to get involved and to kind of start the steps on your kind of coaching pathway. There's a lot of free courses out there. There's a lot of paid courses out there. But both of them are, really knowledgeable and can help you out. And the thing that's kind of nice is kind of depending on the club that you work with or that you volunteer with, sometimes you do get kind of financial compensation for doing that, because the clubs kind of view is that, well, we'll help you pay for this course because when you come back, you're more knowledgeable when you come back, right? So, me taking something like a goalkeeper certificate, that's not something that everyone takes, right? Everyone takes their, making ethical decisions and respect in sport and concussion training, right? But not everybody goes out and wants to, get a goalkeeping certificate. So depending on the team that you work with, sometimes you can even get paid to take these courses. So just go onto the Canada Soccer website or the Ontario Soccer or whatever province you live in. The soccer federations have a whole bunch of courses, a whole bunch of resources for you to kind of learn and grow as an individual. So.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I actually reached out to a few clubs in the past year, just seeing if they needed any help. And my thought was, I'm at home, I have time to do social media or whatever it is that people needed help with. And they were pretty much like, well, do you want to take a coaching course? Because we'll pay for it and you can come out 3 days a week. Like they want people involved, right? So I wish I had known that at a younger age when I had more time. Certainly with the young one right now, it's a little bit hard for me to say, oh yeah, I'll be away for 3 days coaching a team for fun. But it's something I'm echoing you there. Like, get out, check out your websites, whether it's Canada Soccer will have a link to the different provincial areas, or if you're not in Canada, just check out the local region. There's going to be loads of ways to get involved. And I think from what you've heard from Max here, it's incredibly rewarding. Before we move away from some of the coaching and maybe get into a little bit of Canada Premier League banter, what do you think? Like, I know you're new, you're relatively new to coaching. You've been in there for 2 or 3 years. What do you think that we're doing really well right now in those age groups from 7 to 12?
Yeah, I definitely think right now it's kind of a really interesting time for all sports in this country. I think the one thing is that kids right now are just so, they just want to get out. They've been at school online. They haven't been able to see their friends. They haven't been able to get out. So I think right now you're seeing a huge influx of kids just kind of wanting to get out and play sports. So, ever since we've returned back from lockdown, kids are just kind of happy to get out, and local teams, local sports, they're really kind of capitalizing on that. They're enjoying that. So just kind of, if we can kind of continue that momentum that we're going on, it's definitely kind of a good pathway towards the future. And with that, kind of right now, kids have a lot of options. I know right now, depending on who you talk to, people sometimes don't think that kind of Canada has a lot of options, right? They're like, well, you don't have an academy system, or you don't have this, compared to over in England, you join Chelsea when you're 6 years old, and then you work your way, and then you pull a Mason Mountain when you're UCL. Like, you can go the whole way up, right? Whereas here, academies aren't a huge thing, right? Obviously Pacific has the WAVE program, and FC Edmonton and Calgary have the AMSL clubs. But other than that, Canadian Premier League, there isn't really an academy system. So that academy system kind of falls down to your, semi-pro clubs, things like the League One Ontario teams, or even in my case, Waterloo having you start when you're 3, or you can start as early as 3 and work your way all the way up to the League One reserves or the League One university division. And then after that, we've heard of so many people going from League One to, overseas, or the Canadian Premier League, things like that. So depending on who you talk to, some people might say that, Canada doesn't have a whole lot of options, or not a whole lot of clubs. But when you actually kind of dive into it, there's a lot of soccer clubs out there. So kids have choice, right? And a lot of the time, it's close to home, which is really nice. And kind of depending if you live in a rural area or a city center. Obviously, if you live kind of in a city, there's even more options, right? And it kind of depends on kind of the competitive level, right? So if you're really kind of striving to be the best, you maybe say, look at something like a TFC program, get involved with TFC and work your way up that, right? But obviously there's kind of options everywhere. So me personally, I think kind of if you want to work on that pathway, the options are available. You just kind of have to look for them. And kind of building off that point, now that the Canadian Premier League is here, the path to pro is becoming more and more clear for those who want it. So, having a top division soccer league in this country, sure, it has its ups and downs, but it's there. That's the thing that I can't stress enough. It's there. As much as one soccer drives me up the wall, and like I miss replays of a goal because they were showing something else. They pull a Lance Stroll F1. Like, even though there's the ups and downs, it's there. And I appreciate that. And I'll always appreciate that, regardless of what happens, right? So just knowing that the Canadian Premier League is there, and also for kids knowing that the Canadian Premier League is there and say, okay, maybe I can work towards that, right? And, if the Canadian Premier League kind of keeps its image of being a development league, then, you can go say, well, I can work my way up, maybe try League One, try college university, transition to Canadian Premier League. And then we've seen people in the Canadian Premier League go overseas, go to MLS. And then from there, the world's your oyster. So the path to pro becoming a little bit more clear in Canada has definitely been something that we've improved on. We've seen players like, look at Jonathan David, Alphonso Davies, playing with their local clubs, going to MLS and then going abroad. Obviously, the Canadian Premier League players, take a look at someone like Tristan Borges, right? Working his way through the League One Ontario system, coming into the Canadian Premier League, getting a move abroad. Joel Waterman, Zajac, the list goes on and on and on, right? So that being there is definitely something that Canadian kids can, kind of look towards. But at the same time, right now, I feel like the path to pro is, I'm saying it like it's clear and everyone knows, right? But that being said, right now, I feel like the path to pro is only visible to those who, want to know if it's visible. It's maybe not as clear, right? If you ask any youth hockey player, they'll tell you, well, I go here, I'll transition to the CHL, maybe go to the AHL, and then boom, I'm at the NHL, right? Whereas if I ask, an 8-year-old, all right, how can you become pro? 9 times out of 10, they won't have an answer for me, right? Yeah. So it's definitely advertising that path and getting kids to know, but it's there. So that's something that I'm definitely grateful for.
Yeah, and I think you've touched on a few things there, and one of the ones that I kind of want to come back to is the idea that we need to make more people aware of this, right? And you're right. Like, as a hockey player, I grew up knowing what the path would be, knowing what all the different options would be, knowing the different leagues that I could go through and how you would develop from junior to your semi-pro to a pro to wherever you hope to land, right? In the world of soccer in Canada, it was always sort of you go here, you can go here, you can go here, and then you can go to university. And then after that, it's a gray cloud where you could basically go anywhere in the world. And one of the things I always like to point out to people is, go look at some of the Canadian players who played in the early 2000s and in any league in the world, and look at their history, right? Look at their history of where they've played, and you will see so many clubs and countries. It doesn't make any sense. There's no cohesiveness to it because you're truly just looking for wherever that opportunity is, right? So having the Canadian Premier League here, being able to point to that and going, this is for us. This is for us to develop our game, our ability to develop players, and ensure that there's jobs available within this country for those players. And we can always talk about, as you talked about One Soccer, some of the issues with One Soccer, and the Canadian Premier League, just the same. It's a new league. There's going to be issues. There's going to be challenges that they need to work through. But that's part of it. And the hope would be, right, is that you and I, the fans, you being a coach, being involved in the system, also have some say in how our kind of national system works, how this development pathway works, right? And it seems to me, and it sounds like to me, that the Canada Soccer is really trying their best to modernize how we train and to prepare us for hopefully, 5 or 10 years down the line, being a top 30, top 40 nation in the world for soccer.
Yeah, and there's no reason why we can. That's the one thing. There's literally nothing holding us back from being a top nation. Obviously we're seeing so many, really good Canadians kind of come out. Obviously everyone thinks of Alphonso, everyone thinks of Jonathan David, but then, we're getting these kind of diamonds in the rough that are just kind of coming out of obscurity, right? 3 years ago, how many people knew who Tajan Buchanan was, or how many people knew who All-Star Johnson was. Like, it's kind of an interesting dynamic you're seeing just like every year with soccer. And that's kind of the cool thing about soccer, right? It's even the exact same thing. 4 years ago, nobody knew who Erling Haaland was. And now he's the best striker in the game, right? So that's kind of the beautiful thing about soccer is that, kind of each year, even this year, the upcoming season, there's going to be players that are just going to kind of emerge out of absolute nowhere and become superstars. And there's no reason why Canada as a nation and Canadian soccer players, can't do the same thing. We're seeing that happen more and more, Canadian players getting moves abroad and not like, well, I can't find anywhere to play, but, I have this offer from the third tier in Finland. Whereas like, it's like, no, like guys are moving from MLS to Bayern Munich, to Lille in France, or even like Tejan right now, like he has offers from, I believe Lens was one of them. Bundesliga's clubs are putting offers on the table. So it's not just moving over, like saying moving overseas. That's a huge thing, right? Going overseas to play a sport, that's a big risk to take. That's a big jump for anyone in any sport. But, Canadians making the jump to top tier, those top 5 leagues. It's certainly a very interesting kind of time for soccer in this country, and it's definitely very exciting, as a supporter and as a coach, kind of seeing, because I'm coaching in the kind of the exact same pathway that some of these players took. So, who's to say that, one of my kids isn't going to follow that pathway, right? So it's certainly kind of a very interesting time.
Yeah, you never know, right? 5-10 years from now, we might be able to talk about a few of your kids who are playing the Canadian Premier League, right? That's the fun part, for sure. So let's talk Canadian Premier League. We got a little bit of time left here, Max. For those who aren't aware, haven't been following the league, the Canadian Premier League kicked off with a bubble event in Winnipeg called the Kickoff, very creative name. And they basically held all the games in Winnipeg without spectators or fans for the first, I want to say, 8 weeks or so of the season, about 8 or 9 weeks. What have you thought of the kickoff so far, just from an event standpoint? Have you enjoyed being able to watch the teams? Are you annoyed with the virtual stadium every game? What are your thoughts on watching the kickoff so far?
I mean, overall, as a fan, I'm just happy it's back. I think kind of the one thing with the Canadian Premier League being such a new league, you always kind of have that thought in the back of your head where it's like, you just want the league to stay afloat, right? Yeah. So being able to know that they're kind of able to financially sustain a model where they can play is certainly kind of nice to know. So I'm just happy the league's back, and being able to play games. Obviously, like I said, there's ups, there's downs, but overall, it's been a really kind of interesting season since the league started. I think kind of one thing that we're seeing is I'm really kind of enjoying the kind of power dynamic shift right now. It was kind of the first time that we saw Forge kind of have some struggles, right? Is this going to be the year that Calvary finally comes in clutch and wins when they need to win? And then of course, for the last 3 seasons, there's always been that expectation where Pacific's a good team. And then, we've seen where they've kind of come off the rails when they needed to stay strong the most. So me personally, it's kind of been really interesting kind of seeing some of these teams who in the past have kind of had their struggles, right? So, I'm not gonna lie, Valor's had some tough seasons, right? But
I was just waiting for it.
They came out of the gate and they mean business. Valor is a tough team to play against, and I think right now, if you ask any of the other teams in the league, they don't want to play against Valor, right? And then on the other hand, you're seeing a team like York, who traditionally have kind of done pretty good. I hate kind of using the football manager terminology, but York's kind of always been like the best of the rest, right? And this year they're really kind of hitting a struggling point, right? And and especially after signing like Noah Verhoeven, I thought he was gonna boss it for York, and obviously he can't do it on his own, right? It's a team effort. So seeing a team like York kind of go through struggles, it's certainly been interesting. And Forge, losing a couple games, it's been kind of really wild. And then of course, kind of all the things that kind of come with it, right? Certain players kind of standing out and, making a claim for themselves. I have no idea how Marco Bustos isn't playing in the MLS. There's no reason why Marco Bustos can't be playing in the MLS right now. Like it's getting to the point where Marco Bustos is too good for this league. And if he wants national team call-ups, whether that be for Canada or Chile, I don't kind of know his cup or his cap tie situation. But if he wants national call-ups, if he wants kind of to move on, he needs to move on now because he's at the top of his game. He's absolutely crushing it. And it's getting to the point. You could even say this as a Valor fan. You saw him play for Winnipeg for a season there. Like he's a great player. And there's no reason why he can't be playing in the MLS or you got a player like Josh Hurd for Pacific, who, last year kind of struggled to squeeze his way into the team, only kind of had cameo appearances, didn't really do much. And then this year he's come out of the gates and he's been amazing, a really good winger, right? And, personally, I think it's been kind of tricky kind of replacing the gap that Ben Fisk left when he left Pacific, right? So obviously with Bustos, he kind of started to kind of fill in that attacking mid role and scoring goals. But in terms of the wings, when Ben Fisk left, it was like, that was a big gap. And then, so you got this Welsh player coming in from the USL, kind of, had a couple loans, didn't really get a whole lot of experience, didn't work out, wasn't going to cut it in the MLS to their standards. And then he has an opportunity to come into the Canadian Premier League, get some starts, get some goals and make some really good plays. So me personally, I've been loving it. The play on the field, obviously the virtual stadium is just, it's bad. But in terms of ignoring the virtual field and ignoring the fact that the camera zoomed out as far as it can from the nosebleeds, the product on the field has been great and I've been loving it. And like I said, I'm just happy it's there because, I've been so invested in this league, right? So, just knowing that, we can have a season and that's something that we can kind of financially do is definitely kind of a really big step for this league.
So here's a thought. We only have a couple minutes left, but I think you point out something I do want to talk about a bit. I think what we've seen in this third season of the Canadian Premier League is, it seems to me, and maybe you agree, but the quality has just stepped up across the board. And so even though York might be struggling, I still see them as a better team than they were the year before and the year before that. Like I'm seeing this kind of progression. It's just some clubs are taking a little bit of a leap. I think Valor, trying to be as unbiased as possible, this has been building for a while. That first team was not the team we wanted, and Gail basically ripped it apart to the studs and started over again, building culture into that room. And I think the biggest signing that Valor made was the signing of Jean-Baptiste, the best, in my opinion, best center back in the league, and unfortunately is now out for the year. So that's going to be a big worry for us going down the rest of the year. But like you were mentioning about Bustos, absolutely. Him and Jean-Baptiste, if Jean-Baptiste wasn't hurt, I'd put him in the same spot. Those are two players who could play in the MLS. They could be moving on somewhere else. They provide so much quality for their team. I mean, Bustos, when he cuts in and takes his shot, like you're waiting for this beautiful goal, like almost instantly now. Whereas I feel like the first year or two, I wasn't too sure what to expect from a lot of players in the league. I wasn't really too sure what their wheelhouse was. And maybe they weren't too sure what everybody on their team's wheelhouse was. And you're starting to really see that comfort of, I know what this guy's good at. I know what my teammate is good at. And people are getting familiar, like, oh, I know Bustos is going to cut, so I'm going to drive to the net, create him that option, right? It's just really fun to see. And I think the point I'm getting to here, Max, is I used to watch out of stubbornness the first season or two. Just, I'm going to watch all the games. I want to make sure they're watched. Whereas now I'm like, oh, there's games on tonight. I got to watch it. There's a doubleheader tonight. I'm really excited, right? Like there's a real, it's just like the Premier League in England to me now. It's something like, I want to watch every game. I want to know what's going on. And I want to know what the storylines are in every single game. And it's just been something that it's hard for me to imagine life anywhere else or in any way else now. And the fact that, there's going to be a couple weeks here where Valor goes out on the road, but that first game at home where I'm able to go back into the ground with the fans, there might be a tear. There might be a tear of happiness coming down, man. I'm not going to lie. It'll be great just to be back in there, and hopefully, it'll be nice to see a Valor dub in front of me as well. But
For sure.
yeah, there's the bias coming back in. But hey, good. Thank you so much for taking the time to hang out today, Max, and have this conversation. It's been really, really great having this conversation with you. I've really learned a lot. And maybe we could have you back on again, maybe talk a little bit more about Pacific and the league if you're interested.
Yeah, for sure. Anytime. Pacific, Chelsea, Dortmund, whatever you need. And one more little plug before I leave. If anybody from league office is listening, recognize the player union. Going to drop that.
Yeah, we are absolutely that was something I'd hoped we'd had talk about, but that's something that almost deserves its own segment and will have its own segment. I mean, I've had a couple of conversations with a former player and current player who will be coming on to talk some of those issues. So I think it's important that we highlight them, and I think we'll do it in a full segment. So hopefully soon. But Max, any other plugs? Anything else people want to follow you? What's your Twitter? Share it with the nation here.
If anybody wants to follow me on Twitter, it's just FC Maxwell 93. That's where I kind of do the primary of my tweeting. So if you just want to follow me on there, or if you're in the Waterloo area, I'll be catching League One Ontario games, or I have had a history of kind of going to Forge and York 9 Pacific FC away games. So if you're in the area, feel free. I always love to come and chat about football. So let me know.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Max. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much for taking the time today, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Awesome. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. That was Max Mowbray. He is a youth coach with Waterloo United in Ontario. He's also a massive Pacific FC fan. I want to give him a huge thank you for coming on the show today. Really, really do appreciate it. So we're going to be heading into our third segment of the show, our final guest, and it's going to be a little bit of fun. We're bringing in a friend of the show, a friend of mine, Simon. You may know him as IntoRowZ from the old Twitch platform. He's played a little bit of Football Manager. He's also a massive Arsenal fan and an incredible football addict. I'm going to switch back to football now so I don't say soccer when we bring in the Irishman, okay? But let's bring him in.
How are we
Welcome.
How are you keeping, buddy? Or well?
Oh, not too bad, not too bad. Lovely to see your face today, sir. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really, really do appreciate it.
No problem at all. And I'm after making serious concessions to come on because I've had to plug out the fan that has been trying to keep me cool over the past week in a heat wave just for this. So if I do melt to a puddle and end this segment in liquid form as opposed to solid, there was nothing I could do, I'm afraid.
Hey, we appreciate your sacrifice, and if we have to put you in a bottle or something after, put you in the freezer, get you back together, whatever we'll do, But yeah, I really do appreciate it. So before we get started into a little bit of talk around Arsenal, wanted to give the opportunity for us to kind of introduce you to whoever's listening, whoever's watching the show today. So Simon, you live in Ireland, correct? And you're also a massive Arsenal fan. Can you tell me a little bit about how you ended up an Arsenal supporter while living in Ireland?
Yeah, to be fair, it wasn't by choice. If I'm being honest. So my father is a diehard Arsenal fan, and when he was younger, his father, my grandfather, had a pub in the old Holloway Road in London, which is just around the corner from Highbury. So he grew up over there as an Arsenal fan and moved back to Ireland then kind of in his teens or whatever. But so he was always a diehard Arsenal fan, a lifelong fan. And then when I was born, my mother even said that there was a squad poster of the Arsenal squad above my cot as a child. So it was, I didn't have a chance. I didn't have a choice. It just happened. It was passed on generation to generation, basically. So I'm going to say I inherited it as opposed to anything. But yeah, I mean, I grew up from, as soon as I was able to walk and speak, I had Arsenal kits on me. I was kicking an Arsenal ball, and all my life have been an Arsenal fan since. And as painful as it is, you just grow up with that. I suppose that love for it and that affinity towards a club that you've supported for so long. So I can't imagine it not being a part of my life now.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because the last guest, I don't know if you caught it, we were talking a bit about how Canadians find their way, right? And it is very different, right? You weren't given a choice. You were told, you were dressed, and you were given the club that you were going to support. Whereas here, you kind of have to usually find your way there in a bit of stubbornness. It's very interesting. I wonder what club I would have ended up if I had born somewhere else, you know?
Yeah, and I think that like there's a brilliant Dennis Bergkamp quote that I don't know word for word, but basically along the lines of, you don't support a club because of where you're from or because of what they've won. You support yourself because at one moment you found yourself there. Yeah. And I think that no matter, like, if it's your local club and you support them because you're local, you will still have that experience where you found yourself there. There was a moment, there was a game, there was a last gasp winner that went in, that all of a sudden emotion overcame you. And once you have that feeling and you experience that once, that's it. You're done. That is your club, and never will be, I suppose, anything that you can, I suppose, what's the word I'm trying to say here, but you can't break that bond after that. It will stay that way forever because you have experienced that.
It's interesting. There's a little bit of a pop-up in chat here. Jostic, what a beautiful sight to see a fellow Gunner. It's not the only one. They're obviously a massive club, right? So it's very just interesting for a North American to want to add, because you're in a different country. It's not a local, right? It's just one of those things where I'm always curious of where people get their clubs from, with the club they're going to support. So Arsenal, talk a little bit where you came from in terms of your supporting. You weren't given a choice. The old man gave you the ultimatum. Yeah. What are some of your greatest memories growing up as an Arsenal fan?
There's a few. There's a few. Like I was very lucky in the sense that living in Ireland, you can fly straight to London. You're there, and the flight itself is an hour or less. So pretty much every year growing up, I went to a match. Usually for my birthday, my father would, right, away we go, and we'd go see a game. So there's a lot of memories there of, I suppose, being at the stadium, which was just incredible. And like, even I can remember at the old Wembley Stadium playing Barcelona, and we lost 4-2. But I was looking down at Patrick Kluivert on the pitch. You know what I mean? And that and I know it sounds crazy to say, oh, you're talking about Arsenal, but you're mentioning Barcelona players. But that was the level we were at this time, where we were playing these clubs regularly. And that would have been late 90s, early 2000s probably. But some of the best memories, I think as a kid, they're all great memories. But I probably don't remember them as keenly as I would from later memories. Like the double when we did it in 1998, I can remember we owned a bar here in Cork, and I can remember being in the lounge of the bar. It was an Arsenal supporters pub, so all of the Arsenal fans came to watch games. So every game was absolutely fantastic because there was always a group of people. There was always a crowd of people. And I was, 8, 9, 10 years of age, just surrounded by all these Arsenal fans, just absorbing that atmosphere, even though I wasn't at the game. So every game at that age was incredible. But the double in 98, that was, the 98-99 season or 97-98 season was incredible. It was just unbelievable. And the Tony Adams goal against Everton and everything that went with it, it was just awesome. But if I was to say one of my fondest memories, I think, is actually more recently, and I think is when we beat Hull in the FA Cup to go, was it 8-9 years without a trophy, to put that to bed, because I think was it the year before, maybe 2 years before, when we lost to Birmingham in the League Cup final. An absolute howler of a mistake between Koscielny and Szczesny at the end of it, and Obafemi Martins just empty goal and slotted it in. And at that stage, I was like, is it ever going to come back? That winning feeling, this was, I thought we were nailed on to win it. And then I went, no, we're in another final now. It would have been a year or two later. We're in another final. We're against Hull. We should be winning this. And we went 2-0 down. I think it was 25 minutes on the clock. We were 2-0 down. And that same feeling came back, where I was going, are we ever going to win again? Is it going to come back? And I can remember that day, even before the match, had a couple of buddies who were Arsenal fans up to the house, cooked up a big chili, had a load of food, had a couple of beers, and we went into the pub watching it. We were there a bit before kickoff. By the time the game kicked off, we'd had a few. Everybody was in high spirits. Again, it was a lot of Arsenal fans. It was a supporters club down in Clonakilty in West Cork. And after 20, 25 minutes, the energy was just sapped from the room. And then all of a sudden, Santi Cazorla absolutely pinged in a free kick, and we lost, and there was belief. And I think the reason I think it was one of my fondest memories was not only the fact that we won the FA Cup, not only the fact that we had gone so long without having won a trophy as a major club. It was just, this type of drought was, I suppose, a big thing at that time, considering the success we had under Wenger. But it was the manner that we did it in. It was that Aaron Ramsey goal in extra time. And it was the fact that as a fully grown adult, I could really experience the emotion. I wasn't mimicking other people's emotions, as can happen a small bit as a kid. Oh, they're happy, I'm happy. It was a fully grown man, nearly in tears, hugging everybody around him, point in the air, just like, oh my God. Just sheer delight from the inside coming out. And I can remember that whole night. At no point did I not have a smile on my face. I was smiling for a week after it. And that's why I think that was one of my favorite, because it was the first time, I suppose, as I said, really as an adult like that I'd experienced that. Obviously I'd had, there was the Invincibles and everything like that. Again, early teens and stuff. It didn't compare in the sense of just that emotion that I genuinely felt, that I really believed.
It's like that when you truly are losing control of your emotion. You're in that moment, and you've whether you're hugging someone, you're shrieking, you're crying, whatever it is, right? It's this outward pouring of emotion. And here's something I'll just share. Like, I don't think I've ever experienced it. I've seen it. I've never experienced it, right? And so as a fan, that when you see that amount of passion for a team or for a result, man, does it want you? Don't you want to just get involved? Like, don't you just want to find your own club and find that moment, right? And in the only thing I could think of in my past that would even come close to that, and I wasn't in a pub, I wasn't surrounded by other people who were watching the game, I wasn't at the game, the only thing that could come to mind would be Canada winning the Gold Cup at the Olympics in hockey in 2002. We hadn't won it in 50 years. We felt like we should win it every year. That's just how we are in this country, right? And that was where I remember just crying. I don't remember why. I was just like, oh my God, we won, right? Like, it was just this weird kind of emotional moment. I would die for a moment like that, right? It's such a unique moment.
If you could bottle it, you would not be able to keep it in stock, because it's the thing is that's the great thing that sport gives you. I mean, God knows you never just have these highs, because the only reason you can have these highs is because you have had all the lows. If you're a team that wins the league every year, year in, year out, it becomes the same. The year after that, Arsenal beat Aston Villa in the FA Cup final 3-0. It was nowhere near it. It was just that's good to know. Well done.
Especially going down 2-0 early, where that whole energy gets sucked right out of you. And I've been in those moments, where you're going to a game, whatever sport it is, and your energy is there. You're positive. You're excited. You've had a couple of drinks, had a snack. You're with some friends, whatever it is. Then you get scored on early, and suddenly you're just like, why am I here? Like, why am I here, but just, oh, is this going to be it again? Like, am I not going to get that moment that I'm hoping for all day, that I've been thinking of before I went to bed the night before, right?
Yeah, and I think that, it's definitely, and I mean, you're nervous before it. If it's a big game, you're always nervous anyway. I mean, even a league game, if we're playing United, if we're playing Spurs, Chelsea, if we're playing City, Liverpool, I'm always nervous before it. Let's be honest about it. The past few years, I've been nervous before most games. But in particular, these big ones. I mean, even if I think of the Spurs game this year, winning 2-1, I was bouncing around the place. I was off work the next day, and I can remember recording a video and sending it to one of the guys in work of me jumping up and down downstairs going, what do you think of Tottenham? Absolutely losing it. That was a league game that we had just won, but it meant something. I was nervous beforehand. I was nervous throughout the game. So when that result finally comes in, it's just a release. It's just and yeah. I mean, that's why we love sport.
What we do to ourselves as sports fans, like as a supporter and living and dying with this club and hoping for the best, preparing, hopefully not for the worst. You're in this moment of it's extreme anxiety. It's a little bit of stress that we put on ourselves, but we absolutely adore it.
Yeah, I mean, if you say it to somebody who doesn't follow sports, they don't get it. They don't get why the nerves are there, why the emotion are there. But then there's also why would you intentionally and full knowingly put yourself through that? And it's like, look, it's worth it in the end. That's what I would say. When we beat United last season, 1-0, first time winning at Old Trafford, and I don't know how many years before it, I was just buzzing. And throughout the whole game, I was a nervous wreck. Herself was looking at me going, it's okay. And I'm like, it's not okay. It's not okay. It's just nerves.
I can attest to this. Like, me and Simon are good friends. And so often on the days where there's an Arsenal game, he's very quiet. He doesn't have a lot of time to chat. He's just like, oh, there's an Arsenal game on. I gotta get ready for that. Whatever that routine is, and then by the end of the game, we'll chat, but I'll know what the result is immediately. Usually I'm watching it and I know, but you ride or die with that team, and you take your emotion with it too, right? I think that's it's part of the ride. Yeah.
I wouldn't have it any other way, because as I said, you don't get the highs without those lows. So you need those nerves. You need everything that goes with it. That said, a cardiologist would probably disagree with me on what I'm doing to my body, but I enjoy it.
Yeah, well, there's worse things in the world, let's say. Here's a question for you. So we talked a bit about your favorite moments. Let's unpack a little bit of the other box, the alternative box to that. What are some of your biggest moments of heartbreak, your biggest nightmare as an Arsenal fan that you can remember?
Barcelona Champions League final, Chelsea Europa League final. Definitely stand out. In particular the Chelsea one, because it's more recent, so that wound is still open, and I can remember the excitement I had all day. I'm like, here we go, European final, this is massive. And it was abysmal. Words cannot describe how poor the performance was, and it broke my heart. It broke my heart. And I remember the year before that, we were knocked out by Atletico in the semi-final, and I can remember the first leg, Vasalco got sent off for Atletico, and it was we were 11 against 10, and the emotions that I had in that game, even where I was saying we got to capitalize now, we have to capitalize, and for the game we didn't, and ended up losing in the second leg. But yeah, the Chelsea one is definitely probably it's definitely the most recent. So it's as I said, it's the most open wound. Obviously Barcelona, that is huge. I think a few seasons ago, when we didn't qualify for the Champions League, it was another one. We beat Everton on the last day of the season. I think Koscielny got sent off, but it was out of our hands. We didn't qualify for the Champions League, and this was my first time going, wow, we're not in the Champions League. And that was a shock, because I all my life was used to seeing us playing in the Champions League. So that was a different type of emotion in the sense that it wasn't this immediate heartbreak, but it was a realization that, things aren't where they were. And then last season, to win the FA Cup, which was incredible, just to get into Europe, or the season before last, apologies. And then last season, the season just gone, not having any European football, when up until the 70th minute of the match, it potentially looked like we were going to have it. With the way the result was going in the Leicester Spurs game, we were beating Brighton, and I was running around downstairs chanting Nicolai Pepe's name, just going, yes, we're going to do it. We're going to pull it out of the bag. I didn't care if it was the European Conference League or whatever it was. It would have meant that we maintained staying in Europe as a streak. And then that just got taken away. And the fact that it was Spurs winning that took it, it was just no. But yeah, there's a lot of individual ones. There was the Eduardo leg break. There was the Ramsey leg break, where all of a sudden you go, oh my God. There was even when Fabrice Muamba, this was a youth player at Arsenal at that time, that he collapsed on the pitch. There's still a link to Arsenal there. It's a horrific event, and I think regardless of who you were supporting, it was there. But this was somebody I was like, oh, he was an Arsenal player. This happened.
Sticks in your mind, right?
Yeah, there's just that little thing where that's what happens. That's what you think of and stuff. So yeah, there are a lot of moments that suck, I'll be honest. And I could go through individual matches where, like anytime we lose to Spurs, it breaks my heart.
Here's a question for you, actually. There's a question from Jostic here. He's wondering what you think about the Amazon series. So for those who don't know, the next All or Nothing is an Arsenal All or Nothing. What do you think of cameras in the locker room for your team?
I'm terrified. If the season plays out well, it's fantastic, because you're getting to see the good moments. But it will be a very difficult watch if we have a poor season to relive all of those moments. Like I love the idea of going behind the scenes. I love the idea of seeing all of that. So that part I cannot wait for. But I just think that there's so much at stake that if we don't have a good season and I get to see all of that I will be going, why did this happen? Why did we let certain things happen? Because I can guarantee if we have a poor season, there are going to be events throughout the season that'll be marked. And looking back on that, whatever it might be, going, how did we let that happen? Why did that happen? Who said that person could do this? Why did they allow this person to do that? Whatever it might be, I think it'll just add so much fuel to the fire. And let's be honest about it, the Arsenal fan base as a whole, if I'm painting it with the one brush, is a fickle fan base. If you go online and look at some of the comments from Arsenal fans, there's so much entitlement to so many things, and it doesn't represent a lot of the true fans. But it's just, I know well that if something goes wrong in that season and that series comes out, there will be an unmerciful backlash against whoever was involved in that, whether it be player, staff, board, whoever. It's going to be, just incredible, the backlash that's going to be there from certain, I suppose, areas of fans.
Here's a question for you. Does the risk of bringing the cameras in, does the risk of having a bad season in front of the cameras, does that balance out with the possibility of also having a great season in front of cameras, and also maybe being able, as noted in chat here, is a good point from Jostic, an Arteta non-believer could possibly see Arteta in a new light, seeing them as a person. And as before you answer, I'll just say, as somebody who, is not a Spurs fan, I watched the All or Nothing on Spurs, and I grew to know the players differently than I did the way they were presented on TV. I grew to know the coaches a little bit differently. Obviously, they're still edits, they're still presented on a TV show, so I always take it with a grain of salt. But it's interesting when you humanize somebody or humanize an athlete or a coach, and suddenly it's harder to get a little bit more angry at them, or kind of throw that normal kind of the banter at a player, going, oh, he had a tough night last night. I saw it on the show. Where do you think it's a balance of good and bad, or is it purely all risk for these cameras to be in there?
No, there's definitely, look, it's but what I feel is that if it goes well, I think that there will be a gain. But I think that if it goes badly, there will be a far worse backlash. I think there's much more on the line negatively than there is positively. And I definitely agree that, like that, if somebody doesn't back Arteta, that you mentioned there that it could humanize them. That's fantastic. But if somebody is on the fence or doesn't, and something goes wrong, it will certainly demonize.
Absolutely.
And I think that if you've got or if people are looking back and there's a striker goes on a barren spell, and they're looking back and there's clips of this in the way that it's obviously not going to show everything, but it's going to show the best that's there for TV. So if they show a part of Arteta having a chat with Aubameyang, for example, after he's got a few games without scoring, the head seems gone, whatever it might be, if they don't show the right scene there, both of them can come out in such a poor light. Whereas the other 95% of the time that the cameras might have been rolling or not rolling, it could have been the complete opposite of it.
Yeah.
It's, you know, you have to remember that they're trying to put on the best show. They're not trying to tell the truest story.
Yep.
No matter what. What I will say is Arteta's experienced it before. He was at Man City when they did it. I would assume he would have been asked if this was being done. He must feel comfortable with it. He also must feel comfortable that the representation that was given in that was pretty accurate. But that was a bit easy when it was the Man City team that, I'm trying to think, was that the Centurions? I can't remember. It was probably a bit easier than a team who are going through a massive rebuild and are, before a ball is even kicked, are under absolute massive pressure.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, is that for the clubs that have been featured up until this point, I think most of them have been on an upward trajectory or already been in that kind of upper echelon or in terms of their results and where they were finishing in the league. Arsenal really is you get to watch a rebuild.
Yeah, 100%. And I think as well as that too, there's no European football with Arsenal this year. So there's going to be X amount of games that they're not covering. So do you get a better insight into the preparation being put into each week for the Premier League? Because the cameras are going to be rolling for the same length of time, but there's going to be less games and less results that they would be impacting on. So that'll be interesting to see. And I know, like, as soon as it's out, I mean, I cannot wait. When I get a release date, I'll probably book that day off work and I'll be like, here I go, because I don't want to see a meme online before I've seen it myself. Because
the memes are coming. Like, there's no way to stop that. That just happens now.
I mean, they're happening already, and they haven't even started the cameras. So I think that I think I cannot wait for it. I mean, in pre-season now, Arsenal always put up a lot of training videos and the guys getting back to fitness and stuff. And I will watch every single one of them. I will watch all of the drills that they're doing, just these little things, and I love it. So to get this type of access, it's amazing, but it's terrifying.
And actually, Sir Grun just corrected me here in the chat. He is correct. Leeds could be considered a rebuild. So they did kind of cover a little bit of a rebuild before, as it was the beginning of the Bielsa era there. But I think this is a little bit unique in the sense that Leeds was building from a much lower place of expectation, I think, because they were in the championship when they started moving up. Whereas Arsenal, I think in the eyes of many, and especially Arsenal supporters, I think you'd agree, is a top six team. They're part of the big six, and they're not seen any other way. Yeah,
I mean, the difference is that Leeds were, after years of turmoil and financial trouble, and continuing to grow, and certainly it was certainly a rebuild. But if they didn't do X, Y, and Z, it could have still been considered a success. I think with Arsenal, you're basically at a situation where the club is falling down onto a trampoline right now, and it's a case of, does it sink down or does it bounce back? And that's where it's at. And if we bounce back and it's documented, it's going to be amazing. It's going to be fantastic. But look, I'm looking forward to it regardless. I'd be lying if I didn't say it. It's all the drama. It's regardless. I'm going to love that. Everybody loves the gossip, so I think that's going to be there regardless. But there is definitely a fear of how many neutrals and Arsenal fans will perceive certain things, but remembering that they're always going to try and put on the best show.
Yeah, I think that's what you have to remember with any of these shows, is they are going to edit to make it entertaining. They are going to try and focus on things. And as part of any drama, whether it's real life or a show, we like to see conflict. So
exactly,
humans in general like to see conflict. In a show like that, you're probably going to see some of it. So I think the fear, the hesitation around it is warranted. But at the same time, I totally get the excitement of being like, I get to see all these players and places.
Yeah,
right? Like
exactly.
See those conversations.
But it's just, when you see them like pulling pranks, just having a laugh with each other, you realize that, all right, they've got all the money, they've got all the ability, they've got everything, but there is still just a human being there. Yeah. That if you took the name away and you walked past the street, you wouldn't know who they are. they would know, it's nothing. So yeah, that part I will look forward to 100%.
Yeah. So moving on a little bit from the show, let's talk a little bit about Arsenal in the next Premier League season that's coming up. They've obviously made a few transfers. What do you think of the transfers that they've made so far? If you want to maybe talk about Ben White to start, obviously the big money purchase so far, a little bit of English tax added, of course. What do you think of the Ben White signing?
So, but look, we're assuming it's all done and dusted, and certainly
I have let's just say it's done. Cough, cough, cough.
But yeah, I look at all the reports seem to say that look, it's pending a medical, which is obviously delayed because he was with England in the Euros and stuff. So there doesn't seem to be any red flags, but it could come back to bite us. So I'm going to put in that little caveat there on that, just to be safe. I quite like the signing. The price, is it higher than? You see, it's one of those ones that a player's worth isn't judged by the buying club; it's judged by the selling club. What is the number that you need to pay for that club in order for them to release a player of their contract? And as a buying club, it's up to you to decide what is the most that you're willing to pay for that. And if those expectations don't line up, then the deal doesn't happen. I think we saw it even when Arsenal went for Buendia. I think that Villa came in with a higher bid and Arsenal said, no, that's not the level that we're comfortable with. Which, while some people will say, oh, that's not showing enough ambition, it's also being sensible. You can't just continue to bid for a player if you feel that it's going to be more expensive than what you were willing to pay, and you've got that risk reward with it. And the risk reward comes with every player, regardless of transfer fee or regardless of value, experience, or anything that goes with it. But with Ben White, I think 50 million, it's a lot of money. But for a 23-year-old player, I think because of his age, because of his nationality, because of the fact there's always English tax, you're minimalizing the risk that's there. So you've got Ben White signing a 4-year deal. If things go really well, you've got 2 years into it and everything is going fantastically. You tie him down to a long-term contract and he gets a 5-year deal from that. If he sees that out, then he'll be at the club for 7 years. Okay? Now, the chances are he's not going to just go through that and have the contract released. He would be sold before then, or the contract would be extended again. So there's definitely a chance that he could be at the club for 10 years. And if you look at that at 50 million for a player, then if he's at the club for 10 years and you put it that's 5 million a year plus wages for that time, it's a good deal. Because if you signed a player like Thomas Partey, for example, who was signed for 45 million, but he's 4 years older when he signed. So the chances are that you're going to end up paying more per year if you're breaking it down over that. The other side of it is that if things don't work out, I don't think you'd get your 50 million back, but I think that you might potentially get 30 million back, 35 million back. If that happens, you've spent 10 or 15 million, you've lost 10 or 15 million, but you have recuperated a lot against it as well. There's potential add-ons that mightn't have been matched then if that's the way. So you're saying, well, it costs us 10 million, which obviously is a lot of money, but you haven't lost the 50 million. You've just lost a percentage of it. And if it goes extremely well and it gets bought by a better club, you could then even potentially make a profit on top of it. If we saw Van Dijk go for 80 million, Harry Maguire go for 80 million, why wouldn't a player, if he exceeded that and gone to it, go for that level of money again in the future? In which case you said, well, 50 million was good. You got 4 or 5 years out of him and then managed to make 30 million profit on top. So because of his age and the fact that it could be a long-term signing, I'm not too worried about the price with that. If it was a 27 or 28-year-old player and at the exact same ability as Ben White now, then there's more concern because you don't have that sell-on value. And the chances are that their ceiling has been hit. Whereas I think that Ben White certainly has a ceiling above him. And I think that he is exactly the type of centre-half that Arteta wants. We lost David Luiz when his contract ended. David Luiz made Arsenal a better team, not for his defensive work, but from his build-up at the back. And it was massive to the way that we played. And anytime he wasn't there, you could see that we lacked it. We lacked somebody with the ability to play that cross-field ball, to turn defence into attack, to all of a sudden cut out the midfield and go that bit more direct, because we tend to pass too short. We tend to pass too short from left to right. And all of a sudden, when the ball drops back to a centre half like that, if they can play that ball behind the lines, because they will have time to play it, a midfielder more than likely is going to be closed down. The centre half will have a bit more time to play that pass. A centre half with a good passing range can add so much offensively to the team. And I think that's why Arteta wanted him. That's why he's gone for him. And I think that when people keep talking about Saliba, that's where he potentially doesn't feel he's as comfortable with them, with that, whereas Ben White will offer that to him. So that's where my train of thought is. So I'm happy with it. I like it. It makes sense. And I do think that the risk versus reward is in our favor for it.
There's a few questions flying around in chat. I'm just going to pick a couple of them out, or at least summarize them. So Grunge was pointing out, the price for Tomori was 25 million, and now that was part of a loan agreement, I believe, that set that price previously. But his question is, do you think that Ben is twice as good as Tomori? Like, this is purely a price-based question, right? Or is that something where Tomori is just not the type of player that Arteta was looking for, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think when you do it like that, it's easy to go, that player has to be twice as good as that person, and everything that goes with it. But, I mean, Rob Holding was 2 million. I don't think he's 25 times better the player than Rob Holding is. So I think that negates it. Would Chelsea have sold him to Arsenal for 25 million? No. Probably if Arsenal wanted him, we would have had to pay 50 million. Yeah. But he's not going to a rival. He's going to a different league. He's going to a club where he wanted to make the deal. They wanted to make it happen. There might have been no other interest. So the price is going to be influenced by the fact that how many people are bidding on him. Whereas if Arsenal didn't go for Ben White, were there going to be other clubs that were willing to pay that much? Whereas if nobody was interested in him and there was one club that decided they were going to test the water, they might have got him cheaper. But there's so many more factors that are there as opposed to just the value of the player in terms of, if they're this much, they're that good. If they're whatever amount, they're that good. I don't think it transfers exactly like that.
Follow-up question for Grunge. So Sir Grunge wants to know how you feel about their ability compared. Like, do you think that Tomori is a different type of player, a better type of player, or do you think that Ben White checks all the boxes?
I think Chelsea were foolish to let go of Tomori. In my opinion, I liked him because he has, to me, Tomori had a lot of natural attributes. For a centre half, he was quick, which is massive. He had a really good turn of pace. But I think from what I've seen, I prefer Ben White on the ball. Now, I'm not going to say that I am an expert in him. My opinions of Ben White are based an awful lot on games that I would have seen. I would not have been watching every game. And if you look at last season, Tomori didn't play as much, and which baffled me. And I always thought he should have got more game time. In particular, before Lampard was sacked, when Chelsea weren't doing well, I was like, why are they not giving this guy a go? When they signed Thiago Silva, I was like, is that needed? When you've got a guy there that you want to continue to develop? So I think I like Ben White's passing ability. I think that Tomori is probably quicker over the ground. Not that Ben White's slow for a centre half. He's certainly quick enough. I think Tomori is certainly better in the air. That is not Ben White's strength. For a centre half, he's pretty short. I think he's 6'6". So Tomori would definitely dominate him there. But I think it's what Tomori would lead to the build-up, or what Ben White would lead to the build-up play. The beginning of an attack, the offense, I think, is more where his value comes in, versus necessarily his ability to defend. He doesn't tend to win a lot of tackles, but he tends to intercept the ball a lot. So he plays with a higher press. It just suits the way Arteta wants the defense to play. So I think that I think if you were going probably out and out defender, you would pick Tomori. Whereas I think if you were looking at the whole team play, Ben White offers you more than just that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I just wanted to pull a little bit of the chat in there, because obviously Sir Grunge, great supporter of the show. He's an AC Milan fan, so I don't want to turn this into a Milan versus Arsenal conversation, but I thought it was a nice little bit to talk about. And one last point, which I always love to point out, because I'm Canadian and I hold on to these things very dear. Tomori was born in Canada, folks. So yes, he's English. He plays for Canada or for England, but let's remember he could have been the man for Canada. Anyway, just throwing that out there. So that was. We've talked a little bit about Ben White. What are some of the other signings? I've seen that let me just bring it back up here. Sorry, I had a couple of notes. So there was two other signings I think that have been confirmed so far. There was Nuno Tavares and Lukonga or Lukonka.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly. What do you think of those two signings? What do they bring to Arsenal? What kind of holes are they filling?
So, firstly, Tavares, he was done first, and I was quite happy with the deal. Mainly 8 million, really good price. You're talking £8 million for a 20-year-old left back coming out of Benfica. He doesn't have as many first team games as a lot of the other players, but coming in at 21, I think it was 25 games for Benfica. He's rapid, absolutely lightning. From what I've read a lot about, people have been saying he does need to brush up on things, but I think at his age, that's fine because whoever we brought in at left back was never going to be the starter. Kieran Tierney was always going to start. When he is fit, Kieran Tierney will start, no matter what the opposition is, no matter, countering this threat, countering that threat, it will be Kieran Tierney. And I know there was a lot of links that we were going to go for Ryan Bertrand, which I thought made perfect sense because I was saying, like, Kieran Tierney is only 24 years of age. You know, are you going to bring somebody in to be his understudy at 24? He just signed a new 5-year deal. You know, are they going to get that game time? We're not in Europe, so there's less rotation and everything that goes with it. So I thought bringing in somebody towards the end of their career would have made the most sense. Somebody in the 30s as the backup who would be going, you know what, like Bertrand might have taken a 2-year deal, decent money. You lose nothing at the end of it, and you've got, you know, a lot of maturity there. But the other side of it was, if you weren't going at that end of the spectrum, you had to go with somebody who was 18, 19, 20, 21 years of age. You couldn't bring somebody in their mid-20s who was in the prime of their career because they wouldn't get the game time. Whereas with Tavares now, I think it certainly allows him room to develop. He's got to settle into a new country. He's got to settle into a new language, a new way of playing, and everything that goes with it. And he can do that without the pressure of knowing that he will be relied on to be the starter. There will still be cup games. He will still play. Tierney has a bit of an injury record, so if he's giving it his all, it's nice to be able to make that change and bring somebody on. We needed somebody in that position. Again, 8 million risk-free. If he doesn't work out in 2 years' time, I cannot see how we do not get that back. And if it works out, fantastic. We've got 2 great left-back options. With Lukonga, I really like that signing. I mean, he's 21 years of age, so he's a young man, but he's got 69 games in all competitions for Anderlecht. He was their captain since last December. He is exactly the profile that we are looking for. And Ben White, very similar to Lukonga, and all the players we've been linked with, and I'll go into it in a bit, but they are all meeting this profile. So you've got a guy who's 21 years of age, who's got a high ceiling. He's not at his best now. He can continue to develop. He will be able to develop and be molded into the player that Arteta will want him to be in a system. He will already possess certain attributes, his ability to play a pass through the lines. He likes to play a bit deeper. He can do the box-to-box side of it. You know, could probably do a bit on bit more on the defensive side if he is playing that deep role. But he's got a lot of maturity. He's got a lot of ability, and he's got a high ceiling. And again, coming in for, I think it's £17 million plus add-ons, you don't lose money on that, because you don't sell a 23, 24-year-old Belgian international who's previously been the captain of Anderlecht for less than that. Even if he doesn't hit the peak of his ceiling that he might reach, there is no way that if it doesn't work out and you do want to make a change, that a 24, 25-year-old Belgian international central midfielder isn't going to go for that money and more. And if it works out, you could have an absolute star in your hands. So again, risk-free. He's not going to be starting every game, though at the moment, the way things are with our central midfield options, who knows? But he's going to come in as an option, a rotation option, and he will be able to grow, develop into exactly the type of player that Arteta will want. And to have been a captain at 21 years of age, it shows a lot about his character. So you back the guy to succeed. You back the guy to back himself almost as well.
Here's a question for you, and this is purely coming from someone who is not as in tune, as connected to the club as you are. But what I saw with Arsenal the last couple of years, especially last year, is it just seemed like there wasn't, I don't know if it was the locker room accord or whether the leadership was lacking, but it just seemed to be frustration that we saw come out on the field sometimes. And whether it was frustration at other players or just the result of the game or just how things were going, it just seemed like there were certain games where the guys came off and you could feel the shoulders were slumped, and there was nobody there giving a slap on the back saying, hey, you know what, like next game we got this, or like there's that energy. And maybe that buy, given that he was a captain so young, is addressing some of that, right? Bringing in some experience, some maturity, even though the age, you wouldn't assume the maturity is there with most footballers. But here's a guy you're talking about a lot who seems to be bringing not only his skill set from a physicality, what he does on the field, to his technical ability, but also his mental ability and his ability to keep guys in check and calm and lead in a way.
100%. And I think that you need that. And it's not only maybe that how you can influence others, but it's to hold yourself accountable. And when Arteta first joined, it should be 18 months ago? No, it'd be longer than that, wouldn't it? It'd be 2.5 years ago, nearly at this stage. No, surely not.
See, this is what COVID has done
COVID's
to us.
ruined everything.
Our timeline, I have no idea. It feels like a decade ago.
December 2019. December 2019, I think. I don't know what that is in months. But he spoke an awful lot about the non-negotiables. And that was one of the things that I really, really bought into at the start, was that there was the non-negotiables with Arsenal, that everybody should be giving 110% at all times. Everybody should be trying to do these. They have certain standards that they need to hold themselves accountable for. There's a lot of things in terms of the way that the football should be played and how we should go about a game that we have to do. We have to be good, to be able to pass the ball. We have to be comfortable in possession. We have to do these things because they're the non-negotiables. And that, I think, when you look at Lokonga as somebody coming in, he straight away ticks those boxes in terms of that's how he views himself. That's how he holds himself accountable. I know Ben White, I've read a few articles where Arteta has been kind of saying that he sees him as future captain material. So he's bringing somebody in who will hold himself and others accountable, who won't slack on those non-negotiables. So I think that there's a reason that type of player has been picked. And they're young players, but they're young in age, not in experience. And I think that's the big thing that he's looking for, is that profile of kind of 21 to 25 years of age, but with a lot of games under their belt, that they've been a pro for a long time.
It actually leads me into the next kind of conversation that I wanted to have with you, which was around, it seems like Arsenal's transfer, signing, recruitment policy or process, or whatever you want to call it. Project manager here, so of course I'm using the word process and policy. But anyway, it seems like they've got a profile or a set of attributes that they're looking for in each player that they sign. Does it seem like there's a clear plan to rebuild under Arteta and Adu?
If you had asked me this at the start of the transfer window, I would have been less certain than I am now. Now I'm beginning to see it and I'm making sense of it. I think that their hands are tied a small bit by, we need players to leave before we can bring certain players in. And there's a lot of players for sale in the squad. Like if we go through the team, in goal, Leno is currently our starter. That's up for debate as to whether he will stay or go. I think that if they could get a decent bid in, they would be happy to replace him. But certainly a number 2 is needed, because Runnerson is currently our number 2 and he's not up to scratch. And then after that, you're looking at Okonkwo, who just signed his first professional deal, extending with the club. You need depth there, so we need a goalkeeper. But we also need to sell off Runnerson there. You look at defenders, Bellerin apparently is on the way out. Kolasinac is set to go. So if Bellerin goes, we need a right back. Kolasinac won't need to be replaced because Tavares has come in. So if Bellerin goes, we need to bring in a right back. We want a new right back, but we can't bring one in with Bellerin, Cedric and Callum Chambers all at the club. So a lot of what we want to do, I think, is dictated on getting players out. Xhaka, Torreira and Maitland-Niles are set to leave in midfield. But we need to bring in midfielders then on top of that. If Joe Willock goes out on loan, we're going to need potentially another one as well. If you look at the wide positions, you've got Willian, who it didn't work. I mean, that deal just didn't work. It's just as simple as that. When it happened, I went, you know what? let's see how it goes. I was quite happy with it, proven player and everything. It didn't work. And then you look up front, we've got Aubameyang, Lacazette, and Nketiah won't sign a new deal, so he needs to go out. And Balogun just signed his first proper deal as well, long-term deal. So, and there's talk of Lacazette potentially being sold. So I think there is a plan, but it's going to depend on who we can get rid of, because we can't end up in a situation with this huge bloated squad where we're paying the money to the players and we're not getting that back because we don't have European football, and we don't need as deep a squad this season as we would if we did have European football, because there isn't going to be as much chance to rotate, and most players are going to have a full week every time anyway. So I think there is a plan, and I think that when you look at the profiles that we've mentioned, if we look at Tavares, 21 years of age, we look at Lokonga, 21 years of age, and Ben White, 23 years of age. They're the deals that and again, we're putting a caveat with Ben White, but assuming it goes through, that those are done.
Little asterisks there.
Yeah, exactly. Just up in the little corner. So Ben White has 163 club games under his belt at 23 years of age. Lokonga, 69 at 21 years of age. If you look at the players that we've been linked with, James Maddison, 24, 231 games. Aaron Ramsdale, 24, 123 games. For a goalkeeper as well, which obviously is generally a later blooming one. Manuel Locatelli, 23, 162 games. Tammy Abraham, 23, 209 games. Neves, 24, 269. Basuma, 24, 164 games. Uar, 23 years of age, 170 games. Udegaard, 22, 235 games. Even Buendia, who we were looking at, 24, 237 games. Everybody there is, Odegaard being 22, but he kind of broke on the scene at a very young age. We're talking 23, 24 years of age with an awful lot of games under their belt. So that while they're young in age, they do have a lot of experience. They're players who will be able to take account of what they do. And I think that's what they're looking at. If you look at the squad at the moment, the average age is about 24, 25. And I think when Willian was brought in last season, he was brought in to add experience because there are some of those younger players. But I think that when we're looking at the squad and we're looking at the best performers have been young. And I think it's about keeping that you don't want to alienate certain groups or anything. And I think that bringing in professionals at that age with a lot of game time under their belt makes the most sense for squad harmony, and for bringing in somebody that doesn't need to be brought up to the level that you need, that can literally hit the ground running.
It does seem to me like if we're stepping back a little bit and we're thinking about why you're recruiting these types of players, or why Arsenal, not you. I mean, unless you become the manager anytime soon, I'll be
get me in
to continue to have these one-on-one chats. What access that would be. But it just seems to me like they're like, okay, we don't want to go full rebuild where we're bringing kids with no experience. We want to bring in youthful players who still have upside, who have played games. They're experienced enough to know what being a professional is all about, because that's something that people have to learn. And then you're also building for the future. Like, it seems to me like they're really rebuilding. Like if I'm stepping back, I'm looking at a 2-year sort of transitional. This year, depending on who you can sell, there's probably going to be guys you're going to be putting in the shop window per se this season, right? Where they're going to get some games, they're going to get some play with the intention of showing this player is good. Come buy him so that I can put in this younger guy who's got some games and is ready to go, right? Like, it seems to me like there's buy-in from the ownership, there's buy-in from the organization, but the question that ultimately comes from this is it are fans and supporters going to be patient enough for their plan to be executed fully? Or are we going to hear, 5 to 10 games into the season, if things don't go well, Arteta needs to be out? Because we heard it last year.
There's massive pressure on him. There's, regardless of how it goes, you are going to have those fans. There are people who have made up their mind on Arteta and won't be swayed. These people you can't reason with. You can't reason with madness. Okay. I was very much bought into Arteta towards, I'm going to say maybe it was at February time this year. I started to lose faith altogether. Being straight out about it, we a few bad results, and I was going, you know what? Just when it looked like we're turning a corner, I can't see where it was going. And as the season progressed, then towards the end, it did pick up again. On the back of that, and I said, okay, well, let's, you know what? The players are bought in. The players see an awful lot more of it than we do. So I'm going to back the players that generally, if the players don't think a plan makes sense, they will let it know straight away because it's their careers at the end of the line. So I think that there's a buy-in from the players, which suggests that there is a plan in place, and it's getting the right players in now in terms of the transfer window to support that. But there's huge pressure on Arteta because we don't have European football. He's got a full week between games to make sure that we are prepared as possible for that game. We don't have distractions. It should reduce injuries. We can't be blaming fatigue. We can't be looking at traveling. There's massive pressure on him to deliver on the back of that. And I think that he has to deliver on the back of that. We can, if you look at Chelsea finished 8th in the league a few years ago, and I think they won the league the year after. I don't think we're going to win the league. It was a complete anomaly that they finished 8th that year. It was just completely mental. Actually, or was it the Champions League they won while finishing 8th? I think it might have been under Di Matteo. But the idea of that happening, it isn't going to happen with Arsenal. That's not the level. We didn't go from being first, second, third to dropping down to 8th, where you can bounce back quite quickly. We have been steadily on a decline. So I think, yes, there's pressure. And I think that, yes, we need to start well to avoid the additional pressure coming in. And I do think that getting the signings right is key. And one of the things that we're looking at there, if we look at the Ben White deal, Premier League player, linked with James Maddison, Premier League player, Aaron Ramsdale, Premier League player, Tammy Abraham, Premier League player, Ruben Neves, East Basuma, Odegaard, even after being on loan last year, all have Premier League experience. And I think that there's a reason that we're looking at players in the Premier League, because you don't have to worry about the bedding in period. If we look at Thomas Partey last season, he was very up and down as the season went on. He had to acclimatize to a new country, to a new club. You know, these are human beings. If I move to Winnipeg right now, there is going to be a settling in period for me, getting used to how everything works, cultural differences and everything that goes with it on my day-to-day life. So, you know, that's always going to be weighing on you. And you're looking at this and you're looking at potentially, you know, people a lot younger than me, like Lakonga, 21 years of age, coming to live in England for the first time. There's going to be a bedding in period. You can't rely on him, I don't think, from the get-go. And Thomas Partey is in desperate need of a midfield partner. So is that why the Premier League experience, they're playing against the same players they played against last year? They're coming up against the same players. Is that going to help with that smooth transition and getting you a good foundation? If you look at Liverpool, the business that they did over the past few years in terms of since Klopp took over, I think that their transfer policy has been one of the best. And what they did was they used a heavily data-driven approach to get the best players in the league, essentially. They brought in Van Dijk, who made a massive difference. They brought in Robertson at $8 million. They brought in Sadio Mane. You know, these type of players that really made an impact were in the Premier League already. And I think that there's a big thing about the draw, and I think games like Football Manager and games like FIFA, you know, people playing career modes, and you can get players from anywhere, and you want to get a player from a foreign league seems more exotic, regardless of it. Like when you see the name Ben White, it doesn't excite people. It doesn't. Whereas if he was a Brazilian player playing in Italy or playing in Spain right now that we had signed, people would be more exciting. If every single detail was exactly the same, but he wasn't called Ben White from Brighton, people would be more excited.
I mean, here's the thing, though, in my opinion, like if Ben White has a great season, we're not going to hear his name that often. You know what I mean? Like, it's not going to be like everyone's going to be babbling about Ben White. They're still going to be talking about the flashy players, the players who make noise. Ben White comes in and plays a solid game every game. You know, you're going to have those few conversations where, hey, Ben White's been a great buy, and then everyone moves on. Like, it doesn't seem like some of those kind of, I don't know what you want to call it, Premier League vets that you're talking about, those people who've been in the league and have people, they always kind of get almost like undermined, like, oh, you've been here before, like, you're not going to make a big impact. But in you flip that on its head, it's like, no, they're not coming in to make an impact. They're coming in to slot right in and not make waves and not create a problem and not, you know, need to be handheld all the way through the process. They're like, oh yeah, I've been in this league. I've worked a job in this club. I used to work for that club. I know some of you guys. Let's get to work.
Exactly. And if you look at Arsenal, I think last season we finished with the third best defense in the league. And our biggest buy so far will be a centre back. And that goes back to what I said earlier. It's not necessarily about his defensive ability. It's what we can get at the build-up, because our shape under Arteta has massively improved, though it has been at the cost of our creativity going forward, where the number of goals scored has been, it was at its lowest for 20 odd years. So Smith Rowe signing a new contract after coming in there, that's where your creativity is going to be there now. He's going to have another, I mean, he's going to want more goals and assists this year. They're working on it heavily in training. It's one of the things that they've been saying. He wants to add goals to his game and stuff. So I think that the next stage now is just adding those players that are going to help create that. And that's why I think we do need another number 10. We do need a midfield partner for Thomas Partey. Is a major requirement, especially with Xhaka leaving. I think that's going to leave a massive hole there. So bringing somebody in with experience in the league in one of those positions makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So given what we've talked about, what we know is done so far, what are your expectations for Arsenal this year? What's a good season for you as a supporter this year?
Right now, we have to get back into Europe. I think Arteta spoke about the non-negotiables. That's the non-negotiable. If Arsenal finish outside, and I'm going to say outside the top six, it will have been a failure of a season. When you have every other team who's vying for those places having so many extra games, then we need to take advantage of that. We actually need to use the fact that we don't have Europe as a distraction to build up an identity within the team as to how we play, and to go into each Premier League game full of fitness. And if we're playing Spurs on a Sunday because they've had a game on a Thursday over in, Eastern Europe, and they've had to have that travel, even if they don't play the same players and everything, it's still there. It's still taken out of the players. It's still something that they've had to concentrate on in training and everything. They're what we need to be taking advantage of, and we need to make the most of it. I think if we look at the way we finished the season last year, from the turn of the year, or just before it, on St. Stephen's Day or Boxing Day, it would have been the Chelsea game where we won 3-1. It was the first game that Smith Rowe started. He was introduced. We changed to the 4-2-3-1. From that point until the end of the season, and I hate doing this, but if you look at that section, I think we would have finished third in the league. It was second, third, I think, thereabouts, because the form improved so much. We need to carry that into this season and start like that, and just get that bit more ruthless and that bit more clinical in front of goal. And if we do that, we can go top six, top four. I mean, top four is certainly realistic if we can perform and get the results that we did at the back end of last season. If Nicolas Pepe can start next season the way he finished last season, he's going to be absolutely phenomenal. He's going to be there. If Aubameyang can get his shooting boots back on and start taking those chances that he has done throughout his career, he's got a goal every other game throughout his career, regardless of the club that he has been at. You cannot write him off after one poor season. And if those goals start to come, you've got a 20-odd goal striker straight away. If Pepe scores the way he has been doing it, you're going to be getting 15 goals out of him. Then you've got Smith Rowe you want to chip in, Saka you want to chip in, and we need to get more goals from midfield as well. And that's what let us down a lot last year as well. I think we got 6 goals from midfield last season. That's not good enough. You want to have a player getting nearly 6 goals. Partey didn't score. Xhaka got 1, I think. El Neni got a couple. And then we had Willock, who went out on loan and got 7 in a row. So we need to get goals. We need to get goals from midfield, and we need our strikers to take our chances. If we can add that to the defensive shape that we had, it's definitely plausible. Top 6 is a must. Top 4 is achievable if we make the right signings, but I wouldn't expect it.
It's interesting. I top 6 or it's a failure, basically, is the response. And that's the kind of ambition that you would expect given the history of this club, right? I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, well, it should be top 4 or it's a failure, or win the league or it's a failure. But because of the way things are, we'll go top 6.
I'm trying to peel back a little bit of that bias, because I know your first answer is top of the league, baby. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, I got it. But hey, Simon, big thank you for coming on the show today. I really appreciate your time. It has been really, really, really fantastic talking to you about Arsenal. I always learn a lot when I'm talking to you, whether it's on the show or whether we're just hanging out. So I really do appreciate your time. For those who want to stay connected, maybe want to send you a DM or drop you a hello, where can people say hi to you these days?
Twitter, basically. So it's into_row_Z is the Twitter handle. And I'm trying to put a bit more out there football-wise, in terms of get more regular posts out about certain topics and have it primarily focused on football. And I'll try to be as unbiased as I can with everything that I post. And a lot of the preseason games I've been watching, I've been given my halftime thoughts and little bits and pieces like that. And I want to continue that into the new season. So that I'll be hopefully putting up more updates on regular Premier League games, etc. And it'd be great to chat with people, get their thoughts, and continue that engagement.
Well, really do appreciate it. I know I'm always locked in with whatever you're saying. I can always look at what's going on with Arsenal. I wake up and I can see, right? That's all the responses are already there, ready to go. But massive thank you, Simon. Really do appreciate you.
My pleasure.
On, and we'll have to have you on again to talk a little bit about Arsenal in the coming days and weeks.
Yeah, let's get closer to the season. Let's do it, yeah? See if my views have changed.
Yeah, we'll bring it back. Here's what you said. No, I wouldn't do that. But thank you so much, Simon. Have a great rest of your day.
And the same to you. Thanks very much, man. Best of luck.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much, guys. This has been a really, really great episode of Scoot Talk Sports. This is episode 3 already. It feels like we've been going for a while, but this is only episode 3. So the next steps is I'll be going ahead and editing this up for the pod, and then putting it out there for everybody to listen. So big thank you to everybody who hung out in the chat today. The raids, the follows, everything has been just unbelievably overwhelming. I really do appreciate you sticking with me as we go down this new adventure. If you are interested in catching the podcast version, I don't know why you would. You're already watching and have watched it. But if you are interested, it's available on any podcast app. Just search Scoot Talks Sports. You should be able to find it. Otherwise, I'll drop a few links in the chat here for you. Socials and the Discord. There you go. Feel free to join. Feel free to reach out and say hi. But this has been episode 3. Let's go ahead and see who we can raid here, okay? Just going to quickly see who's live in the sports metric here. And I'm also going to note where I need to edit off that ending. It's an edit. But yeah, big thank you, guys. This is it's been honestly such a fun learning experience. I have really been trying to push myself to do something new. So feedback, ideas, suggestions, if there's somebody you want to see on the show, please let me know. I'm just going to see who is doing World Cup. Hey, actually, we'll just hop over here. We were talking about Arsenal. So what we'll do is we'll actually go ahead and just raid the Arsenal channel. They are live right now, doing a little bit of a Arsenal preview. So we'll go ahead and raid them. Big thank you. Much love. And we'll chat soon. If you guys have any suggestions or ideas, please reach out. And Sir Grunge, we will definitely be talking soon. Don't you worry. Don't you worry, my friend. Thank you again, everybody, and have yourself a great day. Let's go ahead and raid over to Arsenal. Continue to love. Thanks very much, everybody.